My 6-year-old son was on life support after a crash when my wife texted, "Bring cupcakes for my niece's party tomorrow." I said, "I can't. I'm in the hospital with my son fighting for his life." "Why aren't you here?" My wife said, "My niece's party matters more than your drama." I froze at her cruelty, then I asked for a DNA. Doctor said, "Your wife." Look, I'm not one of those guys who believes in signs from the universe or karma or whatever spiritual mumbo-jumbo people post about on Instagram between their avocado toast pictures. But if I'm being totally honest here, the sound of metal crunching into metal is something that'll haunt you forever, like that one embarrassing thing you said in 7th grade that randomly pops into your head at 3 in the morning. One second, my kid Leo was belting out Taylor Swift lyrics in the back seat, and I mean absolutely butchering them. Bless his heart. And the next second, some genius in an SUV decided that red lights were more like suggestions than actual traffic laws. You know, the kind of driver who probably texts and drives while eating a burrito and doing their taxes simultaneously. The impact hit us on the passenger side, right where physics and terrible life choices collide, and suddenly the whole world went sideways in the most literal sense possible. When I finally pried my eyes open, which took what felt like 3 business days, but was probably more like 30 seconds. The first thing that hit me wasn't the pain or the shock, or even the realization that my car now looked like an accordion some drunk giant had stepped on. Nope, it was the smell. Smoke and fear, mixed together in this nauseating cocktail that made my stomach flip like a gymnast on Red Bull. There's something about that particular combination of burning rubber, deployed airbags, and pure adrenaline-fueled terror that just sears itself into your brain forever. I'm pretty sure they could bottle that scent and use it for torture because it's that effective at making you question every life decision that led you to that exact moment. My hands were shaking, like full-on earthquake-level trembling, as I twisted around to check on Leo. The back seat looked like a war zone, all twisted metal and broken glass catching the afternoon sunlight in ways that would have been beautiful if they weren't absolutely horrifying. And there was my boy, my 7-year-old kid who just that morning had argued with me about whether dinosaurs could technically be considered dragons, slumped over in his car seat with blood trickling down from somewhere I couldn't immediately identify. His eyes were closed, and for one gut-wrenching second, the longest second of my entire pathetic life, I thought I'd lost him right there. But then I saw his chest moving, shallow little breaths that were the most beautiful thing I'd ever witnessed. Better than any sunrise or wedding day or championship game in human history. The paramedics arrived in what felt like both an eternity and the blink of an eye, which is apparently what happens when your brain goes into full-blown panic mode and time becomes this weird, stretchy concept that doesn't follow normal rules anymore. They extracted Leo with the kind of careful precision that made me simultaneously grateful and terrified, because you only move that carefully when things are really, really bad. One of them, this guy with kind eyes and a mustache that belonged in a 70s cop show, kept talking to me in that calm, measured voice they teach you in paramedic school, the one that's supposed to keep people from completely losing their minds. "Your son's stable," he kept saying, which in medical speak apparently means not dead yet, but definitely not good either. Hours later, and I'm talking the kind of hours where you lose all concept of whether it's day or night or maybe Tuesday. I found myself in the ICU staring at what used to be my son, but now looked more like some kind of science experiment gone wrong. Leo was absolutely covered in wires and tubes, so many that I couldn't figure out where the medical equipment ended and my actual kid began. There were machines beeping and whirring and doing whatever the hell machines do when they're keeping someone alive. Each sound a reminder that my boy's life was currently being outsourced to technology. His face was pale, way too pale, like someone had drained all the color out and replaced it with chalk, and there were bruises forming that made my stomach twist into knots that would have impressed a Boy Scout troop leader. I sat in one of those spectacularly uncomfortable hospital chairs that are apparently designed by people who hate the human spine, and I did something I hadn't done since I was a kid being forced to go to church by my grandmother. I prayed. And I'm not talking about those casual, "please let me find a parking spot" prayers either. This was full-on, desperate, bargaining with whatever higher power might be listening kind of praying. The kind where you promise to be a better person, donate to charity, stop cutting people off in traffic, whatever it takes. I would have promised to become a vegan who does CrossFit and won't shut up about either if it meant Leo would be okay. That's when my phone buzzed in my pocket, vibrating against my leg like the universe's worst timing imaginable. I almost ignored it. I mean, what could possibly be important enough to interrupt watching your kid fight for his life? But something made me pull it out anyway. Maybe it was habit, or maybe it was that tiny, stupid part of my brain that thought maybe, just maybe, it was good news from a doctor or a concerned family member or literally anyone with a functioning heart. It was my wife, Camille. Finally, I thought. Finally, she's checking in, asking where we are, probably freaking out because she hadn't heard from us. I opened the text message, and you know what it said? You know what this woman, the mother of the child currently hooked up to more machines than a Radio Shack, chose to communicate to me in this moment? Bring cupcakes for my niece's party tomorrow. I stared at those words for a solid minute, maybe longer, reading them over and over again like maybe I'd misunderstood, like maybe autocorrect had gotten really aggressive and changed, oh my God, is Leo okay? Into a request for baked goods. But nope, there it was, crystal clear in that irritating font she used on her phone. Cupcakes. For a party. Tomorrow. As if the universe hadn't just tried to rearrange my son's internal organs into a modern art installation. My fingers were still shaking as I typed back, trying to keep my response somewhere between concerned husband and guy about to lose his absolute mind. I wrote, Camille, I'm in the hospital. Leo's on life support. Where are you? I even proofread it twice to make sure I wasn't being unclear, because apparently, I thought the problem might be my communication skills rather than the fact that my wife was requesting cupcakes during a family crisis. Her response came back faster than a boomerang covered in red flags. My niece's party matters more than your drama. Drama. She called this drama. Like I was being some kind of attention-seeking diva because my kid was potentially dying. Like the tubes breathing for him and the monitors tracking his heartbeat and the doctors conferring in serious whispers outside his room were all just props in my elaborate performance piece about being inconvenienced. Drama. Like I'd stubbed my toe or gotten a parking ticket or found out they discontinued my favorite cereal. Drama. As if the worst moment of my entire life was somehow equivalent to missing a hair appointment or getting decaf instead of regular. I sat there in that terrible chair, in that too-bright hospital room that smelled like antiseptic and broken dreams, staring at that single word on my phone screen. And something inside me, something that had probably been cracking for months or maybe even years, just completely shattered and then immediately reassembled itself into something different. Something harder. Something done with whatever this marriage had become. My heart didn't just break in that moment. It rebooted. Like someone had forced a factory reset on my entire emotional operating system, wiping out all the excuses I'd been making, all the times I'd justified her behavior, all the moments I'd convinced myself that this was just how marriage worked sometimes. Nope, this wasn't normal. This wasn't acceptable. This wasn't drama. This was my wake-up call, delivered via text message and served with a side of cupcake requests, and I was finally ready to answer it. So here's the thing about hitting rock bottom. You think you've landed, you think the ground can't possibly get any lower, and then someone hands you a shovel and says, keep digging, buddy. That's exactly what happened when I decided to call Camille, because apparently reading her psychotic text message wasn't enough punishment for one day. I needed to hear her voice, needed to confirm that yes, my wife was actually this detached from reality, that this wasn't some kind of stress-induced hallucination brought on by hospital coffee and existential dread. I pressed her contact, which I noticed was still labeled Cam Red Heart, because apparently past me was an optimistic idiot, and listened to it ring. Once, twice, 3 times, and then straight to voicemail. Her voicemail, by the way, was one of those chirpy recordings where she sounded like a step-forward wife on uppers. Hi. You've reached Camille. I'm probably doing something fabulous right now, so leave a message and I'll get back to you when I'm done being amazing. I wanted to throw my phone through the ICU window, but hospitals frown upon that kind of thing, plus I'm pretty sure my insurance wouldn't cover emotional breakdown-related property damage. I didn't leave a message because what was I supposed to say? Hey honey, just calling from our son's deathbed, wondering if you could spare 5 minutes from being fabulous to pretend you care about your child. Yeah, that would have gone over great. Instead, I sat there stewing in my own frustration, watching Leo's chest rise and fall with mechanical precision thanks to the ventilator, wondering how I'd ended up married to someone who apparently had the emotional range of a parking meter. That's when my phone buzzed again, and for one brief, stupid moment, I thought maybe Camille had seen my missed call and was calling back with an apology, maybe even some concern. But no, the universe wasn't done kicking me while I was down. It was a text from Trisha, Camille's sister, who had apparently been designated as the family spokesperson for Team Insanity. Stop being dramatic. Kids get hurt all the time. I read that message 3 times, each read making me progressively more convinced that I'd accidentally married into a family of sociopaths who'd just been really good at hiding it during the dating phase. Kids get hurt all the time. Yeah, Trisha, kids also scrape their knees and get paper cuts and fall off swings. But most of them don't end up in the ICU looking like they're auditioning for a medical drama. There's a pretty significant difference between a boo-boo that requires a Band-Aid and whatever the hell this situation was. But apparently, nuance wasn't Trisha's strong suit. I should mention that Trisha runs an orphanage, which always seemed like such a noble thing until right about now when I was starting to wonder if she just liked being around people who couldn't talk back or call her out on her garbage takes. She'd always given me weird vibes. The kind of person who smiles too much and hugs too long and says things like everything happens for a reason when objectively terrible things happen. You know the type, the ones who think positive thinking can cure cancer and that essential oils are a valid substitute for actual medical care. But wait, the family circus wasn't done performing yet. Because apparently, they had a group chat, a whole dedicated digital space for coordinating their collective delusion, and Camille's dad decided it was his turn to chime in with some real wisdom. His text popped up like a little grenade of condescension. Don't bring your negative energy to our family events. Negative energy. Negative energy. My son was hooked up to machines that were literally keeping him alive, and I was being accused of having bad vibes like I was Hersheying the mellow at some kind of wellness retreat. What was I supposed to do? Show up to little Madison's birthday party with jazz hands and a smile while my kid was potentially dying? Hey everyone, sorry I'm late. Just came from the hospital where Leo might not make it. But let's party, am I right? Who wants cake? I stared at that group chat, which I now noticed was called the Harrison Family Fun Times, with way too many emoji, and watched as more messages started flooding in. Camille's mom. We raised you better than to be so selfish. Camille's brother. Always making everything about you. And then Camille herself, joining the pile-on like this was some kind of team sport. See? Everyone agrees you're overreacting. Overreacting. That word kept coming up like a bad penny or a herpes outbreak. According to these people, having a normal human emotional response to my child being in critical condition was overreacting. Wanting my wife to be at the hospital was overreacting. Expecting literally any shred of empathy or support was apparently me being a drama queen who needed to check myself before I wrecked their precious family event schedule. I sat there in that hospital room, with the machines beeping their steady rhythm and the fluorescent lights humming their annoying tune, and I had what you might call an epiphany. Or maybe it was just my brain finally catching up to what my gut had been trying to tell me for years. This wasn't a family I'd married into. This was a cult. A full-blown, Kool-Aid drinking, matching sweater wearing, reality-denying cult that just happened to have better PR than your typical doomsday group. Think about it. They had their own private language of gaslighting, their own hierarchy with Camille's parents at the top dispensing wisdom like some kind of dysfunctional Mount Olympus, and their own set of rules that made no sense to anyone outside their bubble. They operated on a totally different moral plane where cupcakes actually were more important than human life, where appearances mattered more than actual emergencies, and where anyone who dared to prioritize something other than their social calendar was immediately branded as the problem. The worst part? I'd been drinking their Kool-Aid for years. I'd convinced myself that this was just how some families operated, that maybe I was too sensitive, that perhaps I needed to be more understanding of their different communication style. Different communication style. That's what I'd been calling it when Camille would dismiss my feelings or when her family would gang up on me during holidays. I'd made excuses, bent over backward, contorted myself into shapes that would impress a yoga instructor, all to fit into their warped version of what family should look like. But sitting there, watching my son fight for his life while his own mother couldn't be bothered to even pretend to care, something clicked. This wasn't me being too sensitive. This wasn't me overreacting or being dramatic or bringing negative energy. This was them being fundamentally broken in ways that no amount of couples therapy or family counseling could fix. You can't reason someone into having empathy. You can't logic someone into caring about their own child. And you definitely can't fix people who think birthday parties are more important than ICU visits. I looked down at my phone, at that group chat full of people who shared DNA with my wife, but apparently not a single functioning moral compass between them, and I realized something else. I was done. Not just frustrated or angry or hurt, though I was definitely all of those things, but genuinely, completely done. Done making excuses for them. Done trying to translate their cruelty into something more palatable. Done pretending that this was somehow normal or acceptable or fixable. The thing about cults is that they only have power over you as long as you believe in their reality. The second you step outside and see them for what they really are, a bunch of people who've collectively agreed to a completely insane worldview, they lose that power. And standing there in that hospital room, or technically sitting in that torture device they called a chair, I finally stepped outside. I saw them clearly for the first time. A family so obsessed with maintaining their perfect image and their perfect little events that they'd sacrificed basic human decency at the altar of social obligation. Camille's family wasn't just lacking empathy, they were actively hostile to it. They'd created this ecosystem where caring too much was a weakness, where emotional honesty was treated like a disease, and where anyone who refused to play along with their collective delusion was immediately ostracized. And I'd been so busy trying to be a good husband, trying to keep the peace, trying to make it work, that I'd missed the obvious truth. You can't make it work with people who think you're the problem for having normal human feelings. I turned off my phone, didn't just silence it, but actually powered it down because I couldn't stand to see another message from the Harrison family Fun Times chat. The sudden silence was almost jarring after hours of constant buzzing and beeping, but it felt good. Necessary, even. Like I was finally allowed to just exist in this moment, in this terrible situation, without having to justify my emotions to people who wouldn't understand them anyway. Leo's hand was small and cold in mine, his fingers barely moving, but still there, still real, still fighting. And that's when it really hit me. This kid, this amazing little boy who sang Taylor Swift off-key and asked impossible questions about dinosaurs and dragons, he deserved better than a family that treated his life like an inconvenience. He deserved a father who would fight for him, protect him, choose him over and over again, even when, especially when, everyone else was too busy worrying about cupcakes and negative energy and maintaining their delusional little bubble. The Harrison family could keep their matching sweaters and their group chat and their warped priorities. I had more important things to worry about, like making sure my son survived this nightmare and figuring out what the hell I was going to do about the fact that I'd apparently married into the Manson family's more socially acceptable cousins. It took Camille exactly 47 hours to grace us with her presence at the hospital. And yes, I was counting because when your wife goes to you during your child's medical crisis, you tend to keep track of these things. 47 hours. That's 2 full days, minus an hour. That's enough time to binge watch an entire Netflix series, drive to Canada and back, or apparently, get a full spa treatment and wardrobe consultation before bothering to check on your dying kid. When she finally walked into the ICU, and I mean walked, not rushed or ran or showed any sense of urgency whatsoever, I genuinely thought I was hallucinating from lack of sleep and too much hospital coffee. Because the woman who entered that room looked like she'd just stepped off a Milan runway during Fashion Week. Not like someone whose son had been fighting for his life while hooked up to more tubes than a science lab. She was wearing this cream-colored designer dress that probably cost more than the ambulance ride, heels so high they could double as weapons, and enough jewelry to fund a small country's GDP. Her makeup was absolutely flawless. We're talking professionally done, Instagram filter in real life level perfection, and her hair had that kind of bounce you only get from a salon that charges by the strand. But here's the kicker, the thing that really sent me into the stratosphere, her perfume. This woman had doused herself in so much perfume that I could smell her from the hallway, like she'd bathed in a vat of whatever fancy French nonsense cost $300 an ounce. The scent hit me like a chemical weapon, so strong that I watched one of the nurses actually wrinkle her nose and take a step back. In an ICU, where there are people with compromised immune systems and breathing problems, My wife had turned herself into a walking biohazard because apparently looking good was more important than, I don't know, basic hospital etiquette or human decency. She clip-clopped over to Leo's bedside in those ridiculous heels, the sound echoing through the quiet ICU like gunshots, and I watched her face as she looked at our son. You know what expression she had? Mild inconvenience. The same look you'd give a long line at Starbucks or traffic on the highway. Not horror, not concern, not even basic human empathy. Just this slightly annoyed expression like Leo's current state of almost dead was somehow personally offensive to her aesthetic. Her nails, and I noticed this immediately because they were practically glowing, were freshly manicured, some kind of elaborate design with tiny crystals or whatever it is that costs $100 at those fancy nail places. They were perfect, absolutely perfect, which meant that at some point in the last 47 hours, while I'd been surviving on vending machine food and praying to every deity I could think of, Camille had been sitting in a nail salon picking out designs and chatting with her manicurist about whatever the hell people talk about when they're getting their nails done instead of visiting their hospitalized child. I was about to say something. I had a whole speech prepared in my head involving creative uses of medical terminology and some words my mother would have washed my mouth out with soap for using. When Camille opened her mouth first, "Did you bring the cupcakes?" I'm not kidding. Those were her first words. Not, "How's Leo doing?" Or, "Oh my God, is he okay?" Or even a simple, "I'm sorry I'm late." Nope. This woman's opening line, her grand entrance statement after 47 hours of radio silence, was about baked goods for a party that, in case anyone was keeping score, was now definitely over. I stared at her for a long moment, waiting for the punchline, waiting for her to crack a smile and say "just kidding," or show literally any sign that she was a real human being with functioning emotions. But she just stood there, waiting for my answer like this was a completely normal question to ask in an ICU while your kid is on life support. "Camille," I said slowly, carefully, like I was explaining advanced physics to a toddler, "our son is on life support." She sighed. Actually sighed. The kind of dramatic, put-upon sigh that teenagers give their parents when asked to clean their rooms. Her perfectly glossed lips pursed together in annoyance, and she shifted her weight from one designer heel to the other like I was the one being unreasonable here. "You always overreact," she said, waving one of those crystal-encrusted nails dismissively at Leo's prone form like he was a minor props malfunction in her life story. "Madison's party is important. She deserves a normal day. Let me break down what just happened here, because I feel like we need to really appreciate the absolute insanity of this moment. My wife, the woman I'd married, the woman who'd supposedly given birth to the child currently fighting for his life 10 feet away from us, had just told me that I was overreacting about our son being in critical condition because her niece's birthday party was important. Madison, a kid who had presumably had 6 or 7 previous birthdays and would hopefully have many more, deserved a normal day more than Leo deserved to, I don't know, survive? I blinked at her, genuinely unsure if I was dealing with a human being or some kind of AI that had malfunctioned spectacularly. Like maybe someone had programmed a robot to be a wife and mother but forgot to install the empathy software. Or maybe the compassion chip had gotten corrupted by too many Instagram filters and reality TV shows. Because surely, an actual human woman who'd carried a child for 9 months and raised him for 7 years couldn't stand in an ICU and prioritize a birthday party over her son's life. That couldn't be real. That had to be some kind of glitch in the matrix. But there she stood, all designer clothes and expensive perfume and perfect makeup, looking at me like I was the crazy one for suggesting that maybe, just maybe, our dying kid was slightly more important than cupcakes. And something inside me snapped. Not in the explosive, dramatic way you see in movies where people start yelling and throwing things. No, this was quieter, colder, like a door closing and locking and then having the key thrown into the ocean. I straightened up from the uncomfortable chair I'd been living in for the past 2 days, and I looked her directly in her perfectly made-up eyes, and I said the words that had been building in my brain since the moment I got her text about cupcakes. Maybe I should get a DNA test. Something tells me I'm surrounded by lies. Now, I'll be honest, I didn't have any real evidence at that point. No smoking gun, no concrete proof, Just a gut feeling that had been growing stronger with every passing hour of her absence, every insane text message from her family, every moment of her complete and total lack of maternal instinct. Something about the whole situation felt wrong, felt off, felt like there were puzzle pieces that didn't fit together the way they should. And in that moment, standing in that ICU with my son hooked up to machines and my wife looking annoyed that I was ruining her aesthetics, I decided to throw that suspicion out there like a grenade and see what happened. Her face twitched. Just for a second, maybe half a second, really, but I saw it. I'd been married to this woman for 8 years, and I knew her tells. That tiny little crack in her perfect makeup commercial expression, that microscopic moment where her eyes went wide and her jaw tensed, and something that looked suspiciously like panic flashed across her features before she smoothed it all back into her usual mask of bored superiority. In that fraction of a second, in that tiny crack in her armor, I saw the truth. I didn't know what the truth was yet, didn't know the details or the specifics or the full extent of whatever she'd been hiding, but I knew it was there. I knew I'd hit something, struck a nerve, found the weak spot in whatever elaborate lie she'd been maintaining. It was like watching someone play poker and seeing them react to a card they didn't want anyone to know they had. She recovered quickly, I'll give her that. Her face rearranged itself back into that annoyed expression, and she rolled her eyes like I'd just suggested something ridiculous, like aliens or Bigfoot or the idea that she might actually care about her son. "You're being paranoid," she said, but her voice had changed. It was tighter now, more controlled, like she was actively monitoring every word. "The stress is making you crazy. You need sleep." But it was too late. I'd seen it. That moment of truth, that flash of panic, that confirmation that whatever instinct had been nagging at me was right. Something was wrong. Something had been wrong for a long time, and I'd been too busy being a devoted husband and father to notice it. Too busy making excuses for her behavior, rationalizing her coldness, convincing myself that this was just how she showed love, or that maybe I was expecting too much. The machines around Leo kept beeping their steady rhythm, completely indifferent to the drama unfolding in front of them. The nurses outside were doing their rounds, checking charts, living their normal lives while mine was apparently imploding in slow motion. And Camille stood there in her designer dress and ridiculous heels, her perfect nails and flawless makeup, looking at me like I was the problem, like I was the one who'd brought chaos into her carefully curated life. "I think you should go," I said quietly, surprised by how calm my voice sounded despite the fact that my heart was racing and my hands were shaking, and every instinct in my body was screaming that something was catastrophically wrong with my entire life. She looked offended, like I'd just suggested she was anything less than perfect. "Excuse me. Go back to your family," I said, putting just enough emphasis on your to make it clear that I no longer considered them mine. "Go explain to Madison why there are no cupcakes. I'm sure that's a much bigger crisis than anything happening here." For a moment, I thought she might actually argue, might actually try to defend herself or her insane priorities or her complete lack of basic human emotions. But instead, she just huffed, adjusted her designer handbag on her shoulder, and turned on those stupidly expensive heels. "You'll regret this attitude," she said over her shoulder as she walked away, her perfume leaving a toxic trail in her wake. I watched her go, watched her walk out of the ICU like she was exiting a bad restaurant instead of abandoning her son, and I thought, no, Camille, the only thing I regret is not getting that DNA test years ago, because something was definitely wrong here, and I was going to find out exactly what. You know what's funny about suspicion? Once it gets into your head, it's like a splinter that keeps working its way deeper under your skin until you can't ignore it anymore, no matter how much you try to convince yourself it's nothing. That tiny moment of panic on Camille's face, that microscopic crack in her perfect facade, it burrowed into my brain and set up permanent residence there, throwing parties at 3 in the morning when I should have been sleeping and generally making it impossible to think about anything else. I have this friend, Tony, who works at a private lab doing DNA testing and paternity stuff. We went to college together, and he's one of those guys who's simultaneously brilliant and completely socially awkward. The kind of person who can explain genetic markers in excruciating detail, but can't figure out how to talk to women without breaking into a nervous sweat. We'd stayed in touch over the years, mostly through occasional beers and fantasy football leagues, and he owed me a favor from when I helped him move last year. and didn't complain about his collection of vintage Star Wars action figures that took up approximately 7,000 boxes. I called him from the hospital cafeteria because apparently that's where I lived now. Surviving on questionable coffee and sandwiches that tasted like cardboard had a disappointing one-night stand with mayonnaise. The phone rang 3 times before he picked up, and I could hear the sounds of his lab in the background, all beeping machines and technical whatever. "Tony," I said, not bothering with pleasantries because I was way past the point of small talk. "I need a DNA test. Actually, I need several DNA tests. And I need them done quietly, quickly, and I need you to not ask me why." There was a pause on the other end, the kind of silence that stretches just long enough to be uncomfortable but not long enough to be weird. Tony was good at reading between the lines. Came with the territory of being the guy who spent his days confirming or destroying people's lives with science. "How quickly are we talking?" he asked, and I could hear the concern in his voice even though he was trying to keep it professional. "Yesterday would be great, but I'll settle for as soon as humanly possible," I said, staring at my reflection in the cafeteria window and barely recognizing the exhausted, hollow-eyed guy staring back. "I need to test me, my wife Camille, and my son Leo. Full paternity workup, whatever you can give me." Tony didn't ask questions, bless him. He just said, "Bring me samples tomorrow. I'll put a rush on it." Getting the samples was easier than I expected, probably because the universe decided to throw me a bone after kicking me repeatedly in the teeth for the past week. Leo's medical team had already drawn blood for their tests, and I managed to sweet-talk one of the nurses. This awesome lady named Patricia, who'd been sneaking me decent coffee and sympathy in equal measures, into letting me have a small sample for additional testing. For myself, I just swabbed my cheek in the hospital bathroom like some kind of bargain basement spy, feeling ridiculous and terrified in equal measure. Camille's sample was trickier, but she'd left her hairbrush at the house, because of course she had multiple hairbrushes in multiple locations like some kind of hair care doomsday prepper, and I grabbed it along with her toothbrush when I went home to shower and change clothes for the first time in 3 days. I felt like a criminal, sneaking around my own house collecting DNA evidence from my own wife, but that feeling was rapidly being replaced by a grim determination to know the truth, whatever it was. I dropped everything off at Tony's lab the next morning, handed him a Ziploc bag full of what probably looked like the world's weirdest collection of random items, and he just nodded and told me he'd call me in a few days. A few days. That's how long I had to wait to find out if my entire life was built on lies, if my marriage was a sham, if my son was actually my son. Just a few days of excruciating limbo while I pretended everything was fine and sat in that ICU watching Leo slowly, thankfully, start to improve. The call came 4 days later. I was in the middle of arguing with Camille's mother on the phone. She'd called to yell at me for abandoning family obligations, which apparently meant I should have been at some cousin's baby shower instead of at the hospital, when my phone buzzed with Tony's number. I hung up on Mrs. Harrison mid-sentence, which felt better than it probably should have, and answered Tony's call. "Buddy," Tony said, and I immediately knew something was catastrophically wrong because Tony never called me buddy unless he was about to deliver bad news. I don't even know how to explain this. My stomach dropped so fast it probably left a crater in the hospital floor. I sat down on the nearest chair, one of those plastic waiting room torture devices, and gripped my phone so hard I was surprised it didn't crack. "Just tell me," I said, my voice coming out steadier than I felt. "Is Leo mine?" There was another one of those pauses, the kind that lasts a geological epoch but is probably only a few seconds in real time. Then Tony said, "Leo isn't your son." The world tilted sideways. Actually tilted, like someone had picked up reality and shaken it like a snow globe. I heard the words, understood them individually, but together they made no sense. Leo wasn't my son. The kid I'd raised for 7 years, taught to ride a bike, read bedtime stories to, stayed up all night with when he was sick. The kid who called me dad and had my sense of humor and my stubborn streak. That kid wasn't biologically mine. Wait. I managed to choke out, because my brain was short-circuiting and I needed clarification, needed to make sure I wasn't misunderstanding some crucial detail. "Not mine. Not yours," Tony confirmed, and I could hear the sympathy in his voice, the kind of pity you give someone whose life you're watching implode in real time. But then he said something that made absolutely zero sense. Something that took the already insane situation and cranked it up to absolutely deranged levels. And not Camille's either. I actually laughed. Like, genuinely laughed out loud. A sound that was probably more hysteria than humor, but still technically qualified as laughter. A nurse walking by gave me a concerned look, probably wondering if I'd finally snapped after days of hospital living and was about to need my own medical intervention. Come again, I said, because surely I'd misheard. Surely Tony hadn't just told me that the child my wife supposedly gave birth to wasn't biologically hers. That wasn't possible. I'd been there for the pregnancy, seen her belly grow, been in the delivery room when she supposedly pushed him out. You can't fake that, can you? She's not the biological mother, Tony said, speaking slowly and carefully like he was explaining quantum physics to a golden retriever. The DNA doesn't match. At all. Like, not even a little bit. I sat there in that plastic chair, in that too bright hospital corridor, and tried to process what I was hearing. The woman who'd given birth to Leo, or who I'd thought had given birth to Leo, because apparently nothing in my life was real, wasn't actually his biological mother? How was that even possible? Had there been a mix-up at the hospital? Some kind of insane baby swap situation that only happened in bad Lifetime movies? But even as my brain tried to come up with reasonable explanations, tried to find some logical way to make this make sense, my gut knew better. That moment of panic on Camille's face when I'd mentioned DNA testing, her complete lack of maternal instinct, the way her whole family had dismissed Leo's crisis like it was nothing, it all suddenly clicked into place like the world's most horrifying jigsaw puzzle. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a hospital mix-up or a medical mystery. This was deliberate, planned. Camille had somehow passed off a child that wasn't hers as her own, and I'd been too trusting, too naive, too busy being a good husband and father to notice. Then whose child have I been raising? I whispered into the phone, not really expecting Tony to have an answer, because how could he possibly know? Tony was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice was gentle in a way that made me want to punch something. That's what you need to find out, man. But whatever's going on here, it's not normal. This isn't just a case of infidelity or a affair, baby. This is something else entirely. Something else entirely. Yeah, that was the understatement of the century. I'd gone from suspecting my wife might have cheated to discovering that the entire foundation of my family was built on lies I couldn't even begin to understand yet. Who was Leo's real mother? Where had he come from? Why had Camille pretended to give birth to him? And more importantly, what kind of person does something like that? I thanked Tony, though I'm not sure what I was thanking him for, exactly, since he'd just blown up my entire existence, and ended the call. Then I just sat there, staring at the wall, watching hospital staff walk past going about their normal days while mine had just exploded into a million pieces of what the actual hell. Leo was awake now, had been for about a day and a half, and was doing remarkably better. The doctors were cautiously optimistic, talking about recovery timelines and physical therapy and all the medical jargon that boiled down to your kid's probably going to be okay. Our kid. Except he wasn't ours, was he? He wasn't mine biologically, and he wasn't Camille's either. He was someone else's? No one's. Everyone's. But here's the thing that hit me as I sat there having my existential crisis in a hospital corridor. I didn't care. Or rather, I cared desperately, but not in the way you'd think. Yeah, I was furious at Camille for lying, betrayed beyond anything I'd ever felt before, and determined to find out what the hell was going on. But Leo? That kid in the ICU who was finally starting to look more like a boy than a science experiment? He was still mine. DNA or no DNA, biological connection or not. He was still the kid I'd raised, still the son I loved, still my boy. The question wasn't whether I wanted him in my life. That answer was a resounding, non-negotiable yes. The question was what kind of twisted, soap opera-level insanity had brought him into my life in the first place, and what I was going to do about the woman who'd orchestrated the whole thing. I pulled out my phone again and opened up my Notes app, because if there's one thing you learn from watching too many true crime documentaries, it's that you need to document everything. I started typing out everything I knew, every suspicion, every weird moment from the past 7 years that suddenly made sense in this horrifying new context. And then I added one more line at the bottom. Find out where Leo really came from. Because Tony was right. This was something else entirely. And I was going to figure out exactly what that something was, even if it meant tearing apart my entire life to do it. Camille wanted to play games? Fine. but she'd just made the critical mistake of playing them with someone who actually gave a damn about the truth. Game on. Here's something they don't teach you in marriage counseling or parenting books. How to investigate your own wife like she's a criminal mastermind. There's no WikiHow article titled 10 Easy Steps to Uncover Your Spouse's Elaborate Baby Swapping Scheme, or YouTube tutorials on how to detective your way through family fraud. Trust me, I looked. So I did what any reasonably desperate man with trust issues and a Wi-Fi connection would do. I started digging through everything like I was preparing for the world's most depressing doctoral thesis. The first thing that kept nagging at me was Camille's sister, Trisha. Remember her? The one who ran the orphanage and sent me that absolutely tone-deaf text about kids getting hurt all the time? Yeah, that Trisha. Because here's the thing about Trisha's orphanage. It had always felt a little too convenient, a little too perfectly positioned in the family narrative. Camille was always volunteering there, always talking about charity work and helping children, always making herself look like Mother Teresa's cooler younger sister on social media. And I'd thought it was sweet, thought it showed she had a good heart beneath that designer clothes exterior. Turns out I was an idiot. A trusting, naive idiot who probably should have watched more true crime documentaries and fewer romantic comedies. I started with the basics. Timeline. When was Leo born? 7 years ago, obviously. What else happened around that time? Well, Camille had been pregnant, or so I'd thought. I'd seen the belly grow, been to some of the doctor's appointments, though now that I thought about it, she'd gone to most of them alone, claiming I'd be bored, been there for the birth, though I'd been in the waiting room for most of it because complications. I'd held what I thought was my newborn son, counted his tiny fingers and toes, and fallen completely in love with this wrinkly little potato of a human. But if Leo wasn't Camille's biological child, then whose was he? And more importantly, where had he actually come from? I called Tony back because I needed more information, needed to understand what the DNA could tell me beyond the devastating news that my entire family structure was a lie wrapped in deception and tied with a bow of betrayal. Can you tell me anything else from the results? I asked him, trying to keep my voice steady even though I felt like I was slowly losing my mind. Like, where Leo might have come from. Any genetic markers, or whatever. Tony sighed, and I could hear him typing in the background. I can tell you he's Caucasian, which you obviously already knew. No rare genetic markers, no hereditary diseases that would narrow down his family tree. He's just a healthy kid with no biological connection to either of you. I'm sorry, man. I wish I could give you more. So Leo was a ghost baby. A child with no origin story, no biological connection to the family he'd been living with, just suddenly appearing in my life fully formed like Athena springing from Zeus's head, except way more suspicious and with significantly more legal implications. That's when I remembered something that had seemed insignificant at the time, but now felt like a neon sign pointing directly at the truth. About a week after Leo was born, or after he'd supposedly been born, Camille had gone back to the hospital. Complications from delivery, she'd said. Need to get checked out. Make sure everything's healing properly. She'd been gone for most of the day, and when I'd offered to come with her, she'd gotten weirdly defensive about it. I'm fine, she'd snapped. Stop hovering. Go take care of the baby. The baby. Not our baby or Leo. Just the baby. Like he was a generic infant unit rather than our son. And then there was the orphanage connection. Trisha had come over constantly those first few weeks, always volunteering to help, always bringing supplies, always very involved in Leo's care. At the time, I thought she was just being a good aunt. Now it seemed like she was making sure the product was satisfactory, like she was checking on inventory she'd personally delivered. I needed to see records, needed proof, needed something more concrete than my growing suspicion that my wife and her sister had pulled off some kind of baby heist. So I did something that was probably illegal but felt absolutely necessary. I broke into Trisha's orphanage. Well, broke in is a strong term. I had a key from years ago when I'd helped with some repairs, and I'd never bothered to return it because I'm bad at remembering that kind of thing. So really, I just let myself in. After hours. Without permission. While wearing dark clothes and feeling like the world's least competent burglar. The orphanage was one of those old buildings that creaked and groaned like it was haunted by the ghosts of administrative paperwork past. I felt my way through the dark hallways using my phone's flashlight, heading toward Trisha's office because if there were any incriminating records, that's where they'd be. The door was locked, but the lock was one of those cheap ones you could probably pick with a bobby pin and a strong sense of determination. I used my library card. Yes, really. Apparently, library cards are good for more than just borrowing books and making you feel like an intellectual. Trisha's office was exactly what you'd expect from someone who ran an orphanage while also being complicit in what I was increasingly sure was some kind of baby smuggling operation. Neat, organized, and full of filing cabinets that probably contained all the secrets I was looking for. I started with the most recent files, working my way backward through adoption records, intake forms, and approximately 7 million other documents that made me realize just how much paperwork is involved in caring for children. And then I found it. A file dated 7 years ago, right around the time Leo was supposedly born. It was labeled Private Adoption, Confidential, which is basically admin speak for we're doing something shady and don't want anyone to know about it. Inside was a birth certificate, not Leo's official one, but a hospital record, showing that Camille had indeed given birth 7 years ago. But here's where it got interesting. There were 2 sets of documents. One showed a baby being born to Camille Harrison, weight 7 pounds 3 ounces, perfectly healthy. The other showed a baby being transferred from the orphanage to Camille and me on the same day, same weight, same basic description. 2 babies. 1 birthday. 1 massive, elaborate, absolutely insane switch. I sat there in Trisha's office, illuminated only by my phone's flashlight, reading through documents that proved my wife had given birth to a child and then immediately swapped that child with a different baby from the orphanage. But why? Why go through 9 months of pregnancy, give birth, and then trade your biological child for a completely different kid? It made no sense. Unless I kept digging, and that's when I found the name that made everything click into place like the world's most horrifying puzzle. Derek Morrison, Camille's ex-boyfriend. The guy she'd dated before me, the one she'd claimed was just not right for her when I'd asked about past relationships. His name was on a document as the adoptive father of a child born on the exact same day as Leo, to a mother whose name was conveniently redacted but whose blood type matched Camille's. Let me break down what I was looking at, because my brain was moving at approximately the speed of molasses trying to process this information. Camille had gotten pregnant by Derek before we were even married. She'd convinced me the baby was mine, had me pay for everything, prenatal care, birthing classes, hospital bills, all of it. And then after giving birth to Derek's kid, she gave that baby to Derek so they could secretly start a family. To cover up the lie, she used her sister's orphanage to swap in a different newborn and passed him off as ours. I actually started laughing. Like, genuinely, hysterically laughing in that dark office, surrounded by evidence of the most elaborate con job I'd ever heard of outside of Ocean's 11. The sound echoed off the walls, probably making me sound like a complete lunatic, but I couldn't stop. It was either laugh or scream, and laughing seemed like the more socially acceptable option even though there was no one around to judge me. So basically, I said out loud to the empty office, because apparently I'd reached the point of talking to myself. I've been funding a love triangle with diapers and college savings plans. I'm like a crowdfunding campaign, except the campaign was help Derek and Camille secretly raise their kid while some idiot thinks he's the father. The beautiful part, and by beautiful I mean absolutely rage-inducing, was how perfect the plan had been. By getting pregnant before we were married and convincing me the kid was mine, Camille ensured I'd stick around, pay for everything, be the responsible co-parent. Then by swapping the baby, she got to give her and Derek's biological child to Derek while still maintaining her marriage to me, probably because I had better insurance and a more stable job. And Leo? Leo was just a prop in their scheme, a convenient substitute who'd probably been given up by some desperate mother who thought her kid was going to a good home. I took photos of everything with my phone, every document, every piece of evidence that proved what they'd done. Then I carefully put everything back exactly as I'd found it, locked the office, and walked out of that orphanage feeling like I'd just completed a heist, except instead of stealing something, I'd stolen back the truth about my own life. The drive home was a blur. I kept thinking about Leo, about how none of this was his fault, about how he was just an innocent kid who'd been used as a pawn in some twisted game. And I thought about Camille, about Derek, about Trisha, about this whole family of absolute sociopaths who'd looked me in the eye for 7 years while lying about literally everything. But mostly I thought about what I was going to do next, because I had evidence now. Proof. Documentation of fraud, of baby swapping, of what was probably about 17 different crimes that I'd need to Google because I wasn't entirely sure what you called it when someone pretended their orphanage baby was their biological child while giving their actual biological child to their ex. I pulled into my driveway and sat there in the dark car, engine off, phone full of incriminating photos, and I smiled. Not a happy smile. More like the kind of smile a shark probably makes right before it bites someone. Camille wanted to play games? Wanted to treat me like an ATM and emotional support animal while she lived out her secret life with Derek? Fine. But the game was over now, and she'd just lost spectacularly. Because while she'd been busy worrying about cupcakes and family parties and maintaining her perfect image, I'd been doing actual detective work. And now I had all the receipts. Literally. If you told me a month ago that I'd be spending my nights hunched over a laptop like some discount version of a TV detective, mainlining espresso shots and developing what was probably a concerning caffeine dependency, I would have laughed in your face. But here I was, living that exact life, fueled by equal parts betrayal and extremely overpriced coffee beans that promised to keep me alert enough to unravel the soap opera that had apparently been my marriage. The thing about discovering a massive conspiracy is that once you find one thread, you start pulling, and suddenly you're drowning in an entire sweater's worth of lies. After the orphanage break-in, unauthorized evening visit, I became obsessed with finding every single piece of evidence I could. Bank records, emails, text messages, social media posts from 7 years ago, credit card statements, anything and everything that could prove what Camille and her merry band of criminals had been up to. Bank records were surprisingly easy to access since we had a joint account, because past me had been a trusting idiot who believed in financial transparency and sharing everything in a marriage. Present me wanted to go back in time and slap past me upside the head. Going through our statements was like reading a crime novel, except I was the victim and also the one paying for everything. There were monthly transfers to Trisha's orphanage, all labeled charity donation, in amounts that ranged from $500 to $1,000. Every single month. For 7 years. I did the math, because apparently I was a masochist who enjoyed quantifying exactly how much I'd been financially screwed over, and realized I'd donated approximately $70,000 to this orphanage. $70,000. That was a decent car. That was a down payment on a house. That was Leo's college fund, which I'd been separately saving for like an absolute chump, while apparently also funding whatever the hell this orphanage scam was. But wait, it got better. Because I also found transfers to an account I didn't recognize. Smaller amounts, $200 or $300 here and there. Always on the 15th of the month, always labeled something vague like personal or miscellaneous. I ran the account number through every search engine and banking database I could find. And guess whose name popped up? Derek freaking Morrison. My wife had been sending her ex-boyfriend money. Monthly. For years. While I was working overtime to pay our mortgage and save for our kids' future. I sat back in my chair. This was around 2 in the morning, by the way, because sleep was apparently optional when you discovered your entire life was a lie, and just stared at the screen. The audacity. The absolute, unmitigated gall of this woman. She'd convinced me to work extra shifts, told me we needed to budget carefully, made me feel guilty for wanting to buy a new TV or take a vacation, all while secretly funneling our money to her ex and her sister's shady orphanage operation. Emails were next on my investigative hit list, and let me tell you, people really need to learn about digital security. Camille used the same password for everything, Madison 2016, which was her niece's name and birth year, because apparently originality was not her strong suit, and I was into her email account faster than you could say grounds for divorce. The inbox was a goldmine of incriminating evidence. There were emails between Camille and Trisha going back years, casual conversations about the arrangement and keeping things quiet, and my personal favorite, making sure he doesn't suspect anything. That was me. I was he. The clueless idiot husband who didn't suspect that his wife and sister-in-law were running what amounted to a baby laundering operation. One email chain from 7 years ago was particularly illuminating. Camille had written to Trisha, "Everything's set for next week. Derek's ready on his end. Make sure the paperwork looks legitimate. We can't have any mistakes." And Trisha had responded, "Don't worry, sis. I've done this before. He'll never know the difference." Babies all look the same anyway. Babies all look the same anyway. They discussed swapping children with the same casual tone people use to discuss swapping recipes or trading Pokemon cards. Like Leo and Camille's biological son were just interchangeable units rather than actual human beings with lives and identities and futures. There were also emails between Camille and Derek, and those were even worse. Love letters, basically. Can't wait until we can be together properly, Derek wrote in one. Our son is beautiful. He has your eyes. And Camille responded, soon, babe. Just need to maintain appearances a bit longer. The insurance and financial stability are too good to give up right now. I was the insurance and financial stability. I was the meal ticket. I was the sucker who worked his ass off while my wife played house with her ex-boyfriend using a kid they'd created together, while I raised a completely different child thinking he was mine. If this were a movie, it would be too absurd to be believable. Critics would pan it for being unrealistic. No one would fall for this. They'd say, the protagonist is too stupid to be sympathetic. And you know what? They'd be right. I had been stupid. Stupidly trusting, stupidly devoted, stupidly blind to every red flag that had been waving in my face for 7 years. I compiled everything into organized folders on my laptop: bank records, emails, orphanage documents, DNA results. I even created a timeline document, mapping out exactly when everything happened, cross-referencing dates with photos and social media posts. If I was going to blow up my life and possibly send multiple people to prison, I was going to do it thoroughly. Call it the project manager in me. But even my revenge was going to be well organized and properly documented. The next morning, or really later that same morning since I'd pulled an all-nighter, I printed everything out. Every email, every bank statement, every piece of evidence I collected. I'm talking reams of paper, enough to kill several trees, and probably raise some questions at the office supply store about what exactly I was doing with their entire stock of printer ink. But I wanted physical copies, backups, redundant proof, because if TV had taught me anything, it's that digital evidence can be deleted or hacked or mysteriously disappear at the worst possible moment. I also made multiple digital backups, external hard drives, cloud storage, email attachments sent to myself and Tony. If my house burned down tomorrow, if my laptop got stolen, if Camille somehow figured out what I was doing and tried to destroy the evidence, I'd still have copies. Dozens of copies. I was like a paranoid librarian archiving the end of my marriage. That's when Camille decided to make an appearance at home. She'd been mostly absent since her ICU fashion show, probably staying with her parents or Derek or whoever would enable her delusions, only stopping by occasionally to pick up clothes or judge my deteriorating mental state. She waltzed in around noon, looking effortlessly put together as always, probably fresh from a spa day or brunch with her equally terrible friends. You look like hell, she said, which was rich coming from someone who'd been lying for 7 years straight. Are you sleeping? I looked up from my fortress of evidence. I'd spread it all out on the dining room table because I'd run out of desk space, and smiled at her. Not a friendly smile. More like the smile a cat gives a mouse right before the pounce. Just catching up on some reading, I said, gesturing at the papers. Fascinating stuff. Really educational. You should take a look. She glanced at the table, and I watched her face carefully. There it was again, that micro-expression of panic, that tiny moment where the mask slipped, and I could see the real Camille underneath. The one who knew exactly what she'd done and knew that I'd figured it out. What is all this? She asked, trying to sound casual, but her voice had gone up half an octave. Evidence, I said simply. Of fraud. Baby swapping. Financial crimes. You know, light reading for a Tuesday afternoon. She tried to laugh it off, waving her hand dismissively like I was being ridiculous again, like I was overreacting to another non-issue. You're obsessed, she said, using that condescending tone she'd perfected over our years together. You make everything dramatic. This is why you're so exhausting to be around. I leaned back in my chair and took a sip of my coffee, my 8th cup of the day, but who was counting? And smiled wider. Camille, this isn't drama. This is an investigation. The only thing missing is popcorn. Actually, no, wait, I have popcorn. I pulled out a bag of microwave popcorn from under one of the document stacks. I've been very thorough in my preparations. She rolled her eyes, but I could see her hands shaking slightly. You'll regret this, she said, and there was an edge to her voice now. a threat barely concealed beneath her usual dismissive attitude. You're going to ruin everything over your paranoid delusions. Oh, I doubt it, I said, standing up and walking around the table toward her. I've been regretting marrying you since the second I said I do. This, I gestured at the evidence spread across our dining room. This is me finally doing something about it. She stared at me, probably trying to calculate her next move, probably wondering how much I actually knew versus how much I was bluffing. So I helped her out. I know about Derek, I said. I know about the baby swap. I know about the money. I know about all of it, Camille. Every single lie, every transfer, every email where you and Trisha coordinated your little scheme. I even know about the kid you actually gave birth to. You know, the one you gave to Derek while passing off an orphan as mine. Her face went white. Actually white, like someone had literally drained the color from her skin. You can't prove any of that, she said, but her voice was barely a whisper now. I picked up the DNA results from the table and held them up. Science says otherwise. Tony sends his regards, by the way. He was very thorough with his testing. This is illegal, she tried, grasping at straws now. You can't just investigate me. That's invasion of privacy. You're right, I agreed cheerfully. It probably is illegal. You know what else is illegal? Fraud. Baby swapping. Whatever the legal term is for convincing your husband that he's the father of your child when you're actually giving that child to your ex-boyfriend. I'm sure the police will have the proper terminology when I show them all of this. She looked at the evidence, at me, at the door, probably calculating whether she could grab all the papers and make a run for it. But there were too many pages, too many documents, and she knew it. You wouldn't, she said, but it wasn't a statement. It was a question, a desperate hope that I was still the same pushover who'd believe her excuses and let things slide. Watch me, I said, and I meant it. Here's something they don't tell you about calling the police on your own wife. It's simultaneously the most empowering and most surreal experience of your life. I sat in the parking lot of the police station for a solid 20 minutes before going in, clutching my folder of evidence like it was a lifeline, trying to convince myself that I was doing the right thing. Because despite everything, despite the lies, the betrayal, the years of deception, there was still this tiny, stupid part of my brain that whispered, maybe you're overreacting. Maybe there's an explanation. Maybe you'll regret this. Then I remembered the cupcake text. The way she'd looked at Leo in the ICU with mild annoyance. The $70,000 I'd unknowingly funneled into her scheme. And I walked into that police station with my head held high and my evidence folder held higher. The detective who took my case was this woman named Martinez who looked like she'd seen every variety of human garbage the world had to offer and was permanently unimpressed by all of it. She had that weathered cop look, tired eyes, coffee addiction visible from space, and an expression that said she'd heard every excuse and lie imaginable and believed exactly none of them. Let me get this straight, Detective Martinez said after I'd finished explaining the situation, which took approximately 45 minutes and required multiple clarifications because even I had to admit it sounded insane. Your wife faked a pregnancy, gave birth to another man's child, gave that child to said man, then swapped in a completely different baby from her sister's orphanage and convinced you it was yours. That's the gist of it. Yeah, I said, sliding the folder across her desk. It's all in here. DNA results, bank transfers, emails, orphanage records, the whole 9 yards. I basically did your job for you. She raised an eyebrow at that, probably didn't appreciate the commentary on police work, but opened the folder anyway. I watched her face as she went through the documents, saw her expression shift from skeptical to concerned to genuinely disturbed. She kept flipping back and forth between pages, cross-referencing dates, making notes in that cop shorthand that probably only other cops can read. This is, she paused, searching for the right word. Extensive. And also completely insane. You know that, right? This is like something from a bad TV movie. Trust me, I'm aware, I said. I've been living it. It doesn't get less insane with time. Martinez closed the folder and looked at me with something that might have been respect or might have been pity. Hard to tell with cop faces. Mr. Harrison, I'm going to be straight with you. This is fraud, child trafficking potentially, identity theft, and probably about 6 other crimes I'll need to consult with the DA about. If even half of this checks out, your wife and her sister are looking at serious prison time. Good, I said, and I meant it. They should be. She nodded slowly. And the child? Leo, what are your intentions regarding custody? That was the question I'd been wrestling with since Tony first dropped the DNA bomb on my life. He's my son, I said firmly. Maybe not by biology, but he's mine. I want custody. Full custody, if possible. Whatever happened 7 years ago isn't his fault, and he shouldn't suffer because the adults in his life made terrible choices. Martinez's expression softened slightly, which I took as a good sign. That's admirable. The court will likely appreciate that. Now, I need to investigate this further, verify your evidence, probably get some warrants. This might take a few days. Are you somewhere safe? Is there any chance your wife might try to destroy evidence or intimidate you? I thought about Camille's face when I'd confronted her with the evidence, that mixture of panic and calculation. She knows I know, but I have backups of everything. Multiple backups. I'm thorough when it comes to documentation. I can see that, Martinez said, tapping the folder. Honestly, you did better investigative work than some of my officers. Ever consider a career change? After this is over, I'm considering becoming a hermit, I said. Living in the woods, away from people and their elaborate schemes. Maybe befriend some bears. They seem more trustworthy than humans. She almost smiled at that. Almost. Fair enough. I'll be in touch, Mr. Harrison. And for what it's worth, you did the right thing coming in. A lot of people in your situation would have just buried it, tried to pretend everything was fine. Yeah, well, I said, standing up. I've spent 7 years pretending everything was fine. I'm done with that. The next 72 hours were the longest of my life, and that's including the time I spent in the ICU watching Leo fight for survival. Martinez had told me to continue my normal routine, not to tip off Camille or Trisha that the police were investigating, to just act natural. Acting natural when you know your wife is about to be arrested for crimes that sound like they came from a soap opera script is harder than it sounds. Camille, for her part, was acting weird too. She kept trying to engage me in conversation, probably fishing to see how much I actually knew versus how much I was bluffing. She'd gotten uncharacteristically clingy, suddenly wanting to have dinner together, asking about my day, pretending to care about Leo's recovery. It would have been almost funny if it wasn't so transparent and pathetic. We should talk, she said on the third evening, cornering me in the kitchen while I was making coffee, my 19th cup of the day, but I'd stopped counting after 15. About us. About our marriage. Sure, I said, keeping my voice neutral even though every fiber of my being wanted to scream, there is no us. You lying psychopath. What do you want to talk about? She did this thing where she tried to look vulnerable and apologetic, probably a tactic that had worked on me in the past when I was still under the delusion that she was a decent human being. I know things have been strained, and I know I haven't been the best wife lately, but we can work through this, right? For Leo's sake. For Leo's sake. She was actually playing that card, using the child she'd treated like an inconvenient prop as emotional leverage. The audacity was almost impressive. Absolutely, I lied smoothly. We can definitely work through this. Marriage is about communication and honesty, after all. The irony of that statement was apparently lost on her, because she smiled like I'd just agreed to forget everything I knew. I'm so glad you understand. I was worried you were going to do something rash. Rash? I said innocently. Like what? I don't know, she said, but her eyes were calculating, searching my face for clues. Like involving lawyers or police or making this bigger than it needs to be. Why would I involve the police? I asked, taking a sip of my coffee and maintaining perfect eye contact. That seems extreme for marriage problems. She relaxed slightly, apparently convinced that I was still the same pushover who'd believe her manipulation. Exactly. That's what I told Trisha. You're reasonable. We can handle this as a family. The family that had collectively gaslit me for 7 years. But sure, let's handle it together. I just nodded and smiled and let her think she'd successfully managed me, all while counting down the hours until Detective Martinez and her team showed up with warrants. The police arrived early on a Thursday morning. I'd gotten a heads-up text from Martinez. Today, 8 a.m. Be ready. So I was prepared. I'd actually been awake since 5, too wired on anxiety and anticipation to sleep, sitting in the living room with yet another cup of coffee and watching the clock tick down. Camille was still in bed when the doorbell rang. Multiple times. Insistently. The kind of ringing that said, police with warrants, open up, or we're coming in anyway. I got to the door first, opened it to find Detective Martinez and approximately 6 other officers, all looking very serious and very official. "Mr. Harrison," Martinez said formally, "we have a warrant for the arrest of Camille Harrison. Is she home?" "Bedroom," I said, stepping aside to let them in. "Upstairs, first door on the left." Watching a team of police officers march up your stairs to arrest your wife is a surreal experience. I heard Camille's voice, first confused, then angry, then increasingly panicked, as they informed her of the charges. Fraud, child trafficking, identity theft, conspiracy. The list went on, each crime announced in that official police monotone that made it all sound terrifyingly real. When they brought her downstairs in handcuffs, her face was a mask of fury directed entirely at me. Her hair was messy. First time I'd seen it anything less than perfect, and she was still in her pajamas, expensive silk ones that probably cost more than most people's weekly grocery budget. "You're ruining my life," she screamed as the officers walked her toward the door. "You're absolutely ruining everything. How could you do this to me?" I stood there, coffee mug in hand, and looked at her with the same mild interest you'd give a stranger having a meltdown in the grocery store. "No, sweetheart," I said calmly. "I'm not ruining your life. I'm just restoring mine. There's a difference." She tried to lunge at me, actually tried to attack me while in handcuffs with 6 police officers around, but they held her back easily. "You'll regret this. My family will make sure you regret this. You'll never see Leo again." "Ma'am, you need to calm down," one of the officers said, practically having to carry her as she continued screaming threats and profanity that would have made a sailor blush. As they loaded her into the police car, still screaming, because apparently she hadn't figured out that the time for maintaining her innocent act was long past, another squad car pulled up. This one was heading to the orphanage, Martinez informed me, to arrest Trisha. There was also a team going to Derek's house to arrest him. Derek actually named his kid Liam Derek Jr. I told Martinez as we watched Camille's police car drive away, her face visible through the window, still twisted in rage. Like, he wasn't even trying to be subtle about being the father. That's basically a signed confession right there. Martinez actually laughed at that. Yeah, criminals aren't usually known for their subtlety or intelligence. You'd be surprised how many people basically confession through their social media posts, or, apparently, their naming choices. "So what happens now?" I asked, finally starting to feel the adrenaline wear off and the exhaustion of the past weeks catch up with me. "Now we process them, gather more evidence, build our case. You'll probably need to testify eventually. And there'll be a custody hearing for Leo. Though given the circumstances, I imagine the court will look favorably on your request for full custody." I nodded, taking it all in. My wife was on her way to jail. Her sister would be joining her shortly. Derek too. The whole elaborate scheme they'd built over 7 years was crumbling, and I was the one who'd demolished it with evidence and determination and way too much coffee. "Thank you," I said to Martinez, "for taking this seriously, for believing me." She shrugged. "Just doing my job. Though I'll admit, this is definitely going in my top 10 weirdest cases, and I once arrested a guy who tried to rob a bank with a banana." "A banana?" "Long story. Point is, your case is weirder." "Congratulations." I laughed. Actually, genuinely laughed for the first time in what felt like years. "Thanks, I think." As Martinez and her team wrapped up and left, I sat back down in my living room, in the house that was suddenly very quiet, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Relief. Pure, uncomplicated relief. The truth was out. The lies were exposed. The people who'd manipulated and used me were facing consequences. And Leo? Leo was still mine. That hadn't changed and never would, regardless of what DNA said or what schemes had brought him into my life. I picked up my phone and texted Tony. They arrested her. All of them. Evidence held up. His response came back immediately. "Proud of you, man. That took guts." Beer later. "Definitely." I texted back. "I've earned it." And honestly, I really had. The thing about criminal investigations is they're a lot less exciting than TV makes them look. There's no dramatic music, no convenient commercial breaks when things get tense, just a lot of waiting around for lawyers and detectives to do their thing while you sit at home Googling, "How long does fraud prosecution take?" and consuming your body weight in stress snacks. Detective Martinez called me about a week after the arrest to give me an update, which apparently meant, "Come down to the station so we can walk you through every soul-crushing detail of how you were scammed." I showed up with my emotional support coffee, a Vinny something or other with enough espresso shots to probably violate health codes, and prepared myself for whatever fresh hell was about to be revealed. So here's what we've pieced together from the confessions and evidence, Martinez said, spreading out a timeline on the table that looked like something from a true crime documentary. And I'll warn you, it's worse than you thought. Worse than my wife swapping babies and secretly funding her ex's love child. I asked. That's a pretty high bar. Yeah, well, buckle up, she said, and proceeded to lay out the full scope of Camille's deception in excruciating detail. Apparently, Camille had gotten pregnant by Derek before we were even married. Not while we were dating, before we even met. She'd been with Derek, gotten knocked up, and then when he'd freaked out about becoming a father and temporarily bolted, she'd moved on to her backup plan, me. The responsible guy with the stable job and good insurance. The sucker who'd believe her when she claimed the pregnancy was his after a few strategic dates and some very calculated timing. She actually planned the whole thing, Martinez explained, showing me text messages between Camille and Trisha from 8 years ago. Found you specifically because you fit the profile. Employed, decent guy, wouldn't ask too many questions. She literally had a checklist. I stared at the messages. There I was, reduced to bullet points. Stable job, won't suspect anything, easy to manipulate. It was like reading a Yelp review of myself as a mark. So let me get this straight, I said slowly, trying to process this new level of betrayal. She got pregnant by Derek, convinced me it was mine before we were even serious, had me pay for everything. Prenatal care, baby shower, hospital bills. And then after giving birth, she gave that baby to Derek so they could secretly start a family. Exactly, Martinez confirmed. Derek came back into the picture around month 7 of the pregnancy. They rekindled things, decided they wanted to raise their biological child together, but Camille also wanted to keep you around for the financial stability. So they hatched this plan with Trisha. The plan, as Martinez laid it out, was diabolically simple. After Camille gave birth to her and Derek's son, who they'd apparently named Liam Derek Morrison because subtlety was not their strong suit, Trisha arranged for a complication that required Camille to go back to the hospital. During that time, they swapped newborn Liam for Leo, a baby whose mother had given him up at the orphanage just days earlier. The real mother, Martinez said, showing me another document, was a 19-year-old college student who thought she was giving her baby to a loving family through a legitimate adoption agency. She has no idea her son ended up as part of an identity swap scheme. So Leo's biological mother was just some kid trying to do the right thing, and instead her baby got used as a prop in Camille's elaborate con. That somehow made it even worse. And Derek just went along with this? I asked. Oh, he was fully complicit, Martinez said, pulling up more evidence. We found emails where he and Camille discussed the plan in detail. He knew you were paying for everything. They actually joked about it. Called you the investment banker. Investment banker. Because apparently, I was financing their secret family without knowing it. The monthly payments I'd been making to the orphanage, those weren't donations. They were child support for a kid I didn't know existed. The transfers to Derek? Helping with expenses for little Liam. For 7 years, I said, more to myself than Martinez. I paid for prenatal care that wasn't for my child, raised a baby they swapped in like he was a rental car, and funded their actual kids' upbringing while thinking I was being a good husband and father. Yeah, Martinez said sympathetically. You were basically running a crowdfunding campaign called Help My Wife's Ex Raise Their Secret Love Child while being completely oblivious. I laughed, because at this point what else could I do? My life is literally a rejected reality TV script. Even Netflix would say this is too unrealistic. Martinez actually smiled at that. If it makes you feel better, all 3 of them are looking at serious prison time. Fraud, child trafficking, identity theft, conspiracy. The DA is throwing the book at them. Trisha especially, since this apparently wasn't the first time she'd facilitated questionable adoptions through the orphanage. Wait, what? Yeah, turns out Trisha's been running a side business matching babies with people willing to pay under the table. Your situation was just the most elaborate version. She's looking at federal charges. So Camille's sister wasn't just complicit. She was basically running a black market baby operation disguised as charity work. Every family dinner I'd sat through, every holiday where Trisha had played the saint helping orphans, She'd been smuggling children like they were knockoff handbags. The good news, Martinez continued, is that legally, Leo is considered abandoned property that you acquired in good faith. Combined with your demonstrated commitment to his care, especially during his hospitalization, the court will almost certainly grant you full custody. Abandoned property. My son, because he was my son, regardless of biology, was being described like a lost wallet I'd found. But I understood what she meant. Legally, I was in the clear. Emotionally, I was still processing the fact that my entire marriage had been a transaction and I'd been too trusting to notice. What about Camille's family? I asked. The ones who kept telling me I was being dramatic? They claim they knew nothing, Martinez said. And unfortunately, we can't prove otherwise. They're terrible people, but being terrible isn't illegal. Fair enough. At least Camille, Derek, and Trisha were facing consequences. That would have to be enough. As I left the police station that day, walking out into sunshine that felt too bright for the darkness of what I'd just learned, I realized something. I'd spent 7 years being someone's backup plan, their safety net, their reliable succor. But I was done with that now. Camille wanted to play games. She'd played and lost spectacularly. Derek thought he was clever. He was going to prison. Trisha believed she could run her schemes forever. Federal charges say otherwise. And me? I was going home to my son, my real son, the one who mattered regardless of DNA. And we were going to build something honest, something real, something that didn't require lies or schemes or treating people like investments. Because at the end of the day, that's what Camille never understood. You can't build a life on fraud. Eventually, the truth catches up. And when it does, it brings handcuffs. The custody hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday morning, which felt appropriate because Tuesdays are already inherently depressing, and this one was shaping up to be either the best or worst day of my life, depending on which way the judge swung. I showed up in my best suit, the one I usually reserve for job interviews and funerals, both of which involve people judging you intensely, and tried not to look like someone who'd been surviving on coffee and anxiety for the past month. Leo was back home by then, fully recovered from the accident and blissfully unaware that his entire existence was currently being debated in family court. I'd hired a lawyer, this sharp woman named Rebecca Chun, who specialized in custody cases and had the kind of reputation that made opposing counsel nervous. She'd taken one look at my case file and said, "This is the wildest thing I've ever seen, and I once represented a guy whose wife tried to steal his kidney." High praise, apparently. The courtroom was one of those wood-paneled rooms that smell like old paper and broken families, with a judge who looked like she'd seen every variety of human dysfunction and had exactly zero patience for nonsense. Judge Patricia Winters, according to the nameplate, and she had the expression of someone who drank her coffee black and her justice swift. Camille's lawyer tried to argue that I had no legal right to Leo since I wasn't the biological father, which was technically true but also completely missed the point. Rebecca stood up and systematically destroyed that argument with the precision of a surgeon performing open-heart surgery. "Your Honor," Rebecca said, laying out photos of me and Leo over the years, teaching him to ride a bike, at his school plays, in the hospital during his recovery. "Biology doesn't make a parent. Choice does. Commitment does. My client has been this child's father in every meaningful way for 7 years. He's the one who showed up, the one who stayed, the one who fought for Leo's life when his biological mother couldn't be bothered to visit him in the ICU because she had a birthday party to attend. She actually submitted the cupcake text as evidence. The judge read it, and I swear I saw her eye twitch. The prosecution also had representatives there because this wasn't just a custody case. It was part of a larger criminal investigation. They laid out the whole scheme, the baby swap, the fraud, the orphanage operation. By the time they finished, even Camille's lawyer looked like he wanted to switch sides. Then it was my turn to speak. Judge Winters looked at me over her glasses and asked the question that mattered. "Mr. Harrison, you understand that Leo is not your biological child. You've been made aware of the circumstances of his birth and placement in your home. Given all of this, what are your intentions?" I stood up, and for once in this entire nightmare, I knew exactly what to say without hesitation or doubt. "Your Honor, the police call him Orphanage Boy in their reports. Legal documents refer to him as the minor child in question. But to me, he's Leo. He's the kid who sings Taylor Swift off-key in the car. Who asks impossible questions about whether dinosaurs are technically dragons? Who calls me dad not because of genetics, but because that's who I've been to him every single day of his life. I took a breath, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. I may not be his father by DNA, but I'm his father by choice. And that's the kind that lasts. That's the kind that matters. Blood doesn't make you show up at 2 a.m. when your kid has nightmares. Blood doesn't make you sit in an ICU for days praying for a miracle. Choice does. Love does. Commitment does. Judge Winters was quiet for a moment, looking at the evidence spread before her. At me, at the empty chair where Camille would have been if she wasn't currently in jail awaiting trial. Mr. Harrison, she finally said, I've been doing this job for 23 years. I've seen biological parents who treat their children like burdens and non-biological parents who move heaven and earth for kids who aren't theirs. DNA is just information. Parenthood is action. She signed something, stamped it with the kind of authority that suggested the matter was settled. Full custody granted to Mr. Harrison, effective immediately. This child has been through enough disruption. He deserves stability, and clearly, you're the one who can provide it. I actually felt my knees go weak with relief. Rebecca squeezed my shoulder, congratulating me. While Camille's lawyer packed up his briefcase looking relieved, he didn't have to argue this disaster anymore. As I walked out of that courtroom, legal custody papers in hand, I realized something. Camille had tried to use Leo as a prop in her scheme, a convenient stand-in for the child she actually wanted to raise. But in doing so, she'd given me the greatest gift of my life, a son who chose me back, every single day, just by being himself. Biology didn't matter. The circumstances didn't matter. What mattered was that Leo was mine, officially and completely, and no one could ever take that away again. 6 months later, and I'm still not entirely convinced my life isn't some elaborate prank show where Ashton Kutcher is going to jump out from behind a curtain and yell, "You've been punked." But no camera crews have appeared, which means this is actually my real life now. Single dad, reformed trusting idiot, and proud owner of the world's most expensive education in why you should always trust your gut. Leo recovered fully from the accident, which the doctor said was somewhere between miraculous and kids are basically made of rubber. The scars faded, the nightmares stopped, and gradually the kid I knew came back. The one who could turn a trip to the grocery store into a philosophical debate about whether hot dogs are sandwiches and why dinosaurs definitely should have learned to fly better. We moved out of the old house because honestly, those walls had seen too much drama, and I couldn't look at the dining room table without remembering it covered in evidence of my wife's crimes. We found a smaller place across town, nothing fancy, but it had a backyard where Leo could play and, importantly, zero memories of Camille's perfume or her family's judgmental visits or any of the toxicity that had poisoned our old life. The trial happened in the spring. I had to testify, which was exactly as fun as it sounds, reliving every humiliating detail while lawyers asked questions designed to make me look either stupid for not noticing or crazy for caring so much. But the evidence spoke for itself, and even Camille's expensive lawyer couldn't spin baby swapping into something sympathetic. She got 8 years. Trisha got 12 because of the whole running an illegal adoption ring thing. Derek got 6, which honestly felt light, but apparently being stupid enough to name your secret love child after yourself counts as mitigating circumstances or something. Camille's family tried to fight for visitation rights with Leo, which was hilarious because these were the same people who'd called my son's near-death experience drama and told me to bring cupcakes instead of, being a parent. The judge shut that down so fast I'm pretty sure it broke some kind of legal speed record. Turns out bring cupcakes doesn't play well in family court. Leo knows some of what happened. Age-appropriate version, obviously. I told him that his mom had made some bad choices and had to go away for a while. That sometimes adults mess up in big ways, but that none of it was his fault and nothing could ever change how much I loved him. He took it surprisingly well, probably because 7-year-olds are resilient in ways that would make therapy patients everywhere jealous. "So mom's in timeout?" he asked, which was technically accurate. "A really, really long timeout," I confirmed. "Okay," he said, then went back to building a Lego spaceship. Kids got priorities, and dwelling on parental dysfunction isn't one of them. I respect that. Every once in a while, I pass a bakery and I laugh. I can't help it. The universe has a twisted sense of humor, And the fact that my entire life imploded because of a text message about cupcakes is the kind of absurd irony that you couldn't make up if you tried. That text sits screenshotted on my phone, a reminder of the exact moment I realized I'd married a sociopath with excellent taste in designer handbags and zero maternal instinct. Bring cupcakes for my niece's party tomorrow. 6 words that destroyed a marriage, exposed a conspiracy, and led to 3 arrests. Not bad for a pastry-related request. Tony still brings it up whenever we grab beers, which is more often now because apparently solving your own criminal case makes you infinitely more interesting at social gatherings. Remember when your biggest problem was whether to get chocolate or vanilla? He'll say, and we'll laugh because the alternative is crying, and I've done enough of that to last a lifetime. I started dating again recently, which feels weird and terrifying in equal measure. My first date post-divorce, I actually told the woman the whole story, figured it was better to get it out in the open rather than spring. By the way, my ex-wife is in prison for baby swapping on her during month 3. She laughed so hard she snorted wine, which I took as a good sign. We've been seeing each other for 2 months now, and she hasn't tried to swap any children yet, so I'm calling it a win. Leo likes her too, which matters more than anything else. She came over for dinner last week and spent an hour debating with him about whether Spider-Man could beat Superman in a fight. She's Team Superman. He's Team Spider-Man. I'm Team, can we please talk about literally anything else? Watching them argue about comic book characters while I made pasta, I realized something. This is what family should feel like. Easy, honest, no hidden agendas or secret bank transfers or elaborate schemes. Just people choosing to show up for each other every single day. Last week, Leo asked me why I kept him after finding out the truth. We were in the car, because apparently all our important conversations happen in vehicles while Taylor Swift plays in the background, and he just came out with it. Dad, if I'm not really yours, why didn't you give me back? My heart broke a little, then immediately pieced itself back together stronger. I pulled over because this conversation deserved my full attention, not divided focus between parenting and traffic. Leo, I said, turning to look at him in the back seat, you are really mine. Maybe not because of DNA or biology or any of that science stuff, but you're mine because I choose you. Every single day, I choose you. And you know what's cool about that? What? It means our family isn't an accident of genetics. It's not something that just happened because of biology. It's something we built together on purpose because we wanted to. That's actually way more special than just sharing DNA. He thought about that for a minute, his face scrunched up in concentration the way it does when he's processing something big. Then he smiled, that goofy, gap-toothed smile that could light up a whole hospital ward. So we're like superheroes choosing our own origin story? I laughed. Exactly like that. We're writing our own comic book, and it's way better than anything we could have inherited. Cool, he said, satisfied with that explanation. Can we get McDonald's? And just like that, the profound moment was over, replaced by the eternal question of whether we should get nuggets or a burger. That's parenthood in a nutshell. Deep philosophical discussions followed immediately by debates about fast food. As I pulled back into traffic, with Leo chattering about his day and Taylor Swift promising that we'd never go out of style, I realized something. Camille had tried to use me, manipulate me, turn me into a supporting character in her twisted story. But in doing so, she'd accidentally given me the starring role in something better, a real family built on choice, honesty, and stubborn determination to show up even when things got hard. The text that started with "Bring cupcakes" ended with 3 arrests, a DNA scandal, and me realizing that fatherhood isn't about blood, it's about choice. It's about sitting in ICU rooms and going to school plays and having car conversations about superhero origin stories. It's about being there, consistently and completely, regardless of what genetics say. I look at Leo now, singing off-key, asking impossible questions, being entirely himself, and I think about how close I came to losing this. How I almost stayed in that toxic marriage, making excuses for inexcusable behavior, convincing myself that this was just how families worked. Hey Dad, Leo says from the back seat, interrupting my thoughts. You know what? What, buddy? You're my favorite person in the whole world. And there it is. The moment that makes every sleepless night, every court appearance, every painful revelation worth it. Because this kid, This amazing, resilient, off-key singing kid chose me right back. You're my favorite too, Leo, I say, and I mean it with every fiber of my being. He grins. Even more than coffee. I pretend to think about it. It's close, but yeah, even more than coffee. Wow, he says, genuinely impressed. That's a lot. It really is. But some things, some people, are worth more than all the coffee in the world. Worth more than biological connections, or convenient lies, or elaborate schemes. Worth everything, actually. And that's a truth no DNA test can ever dispute. At the airport, my wife's sister said, "He can't even afford economy." My wife laughed as they boarded first class. I waited quietly until a man in uniform said, "Your jet's ready, sir." The entire platform froze. Look, I'm not saying airports are the seventh circle of hell, but I'm also not saying that. There's something about the fluorescent lighting, the overpriced bottled water, and the general aura of collective misery that really brings out the best in humanity. And by best, I mean absolute worst. Especially when you throw in-laws into the mix, because apparently God looked down at airports and thought, you know what this needs? More judgment and passive-aggressive commentary about your life choices. So there I was, standing in Terminal 3 at JFK, watching my father-in-law Harold complain about literally everything within a 50-foot radius. The man had opinions about the carpeting, the font on the departure screens, and, his personal favorite, the types of people who dare to share oxygen with him in public spaces. His voice, which I can only describe as what a kazoo would sound like if it developed a superiority complex, cut through the ambient noise of rolling suitcases and crying babies like a hot knife through butter that nobody asked for. "These delays are absolutely ridiculous," Harold announced to nobody in particular, though his voice carried far enough that I'm pretty sure people in Terminal 5 could hear him. "It's always because of the budget airlines. They let just anyone fly these days. Poor people clog up the whole system." I wish I was making this up. I really do. But Harold genuinely believed that economic inequality was something that should be aggressively enforced at 30,000 feet, and that anyone flying economy was personally responsible for his mimosa being delayed by 8 minutes. My wife, Bella, God, where do I even start with Bella, was standing next to me, but might as well have been on a different planet. Her face was illuminated by the cold blue glow of her iPhone screen, thumbs moving at superhuman speed as she scrolled through Instagram, double-tapping photos of people she claimed to hate, but religiously followed anyway. Every few seconds, she'd let out this little exhale of air through her nose. Not quite a laugh. More like the sound a deflating tire would make if it was judging someone's outfit choices. Then there was Clara, Bella's sister, strutting about 15 feet ahead of us like she was walking a runway in Milan instead of navigating the grimy corridors of an international airport. The woman was wearing 6-inch heels, and I'm not exaggerating here. I'm talking stilts that would make a circus performer nervous, that looked like they'd been specifically designed by Satan's personal stylist during a particularly vindictive mood. Each step she took sounded like a tiny hammer hitting the floor, announcing her presence like some kind of designer-clad town crier. Her carry-on luggage probably cost more than my first car, and she made sure everyone knew it by the way she kept adjusting it, making sure the logo faced outward at all times. Clara suddenly stopped, causing a minor traffic jam of confused travelers behind her, and turned around with this smirk on her face. You know the kind, the expression that says, "I'm about to say something that I think is clever but is actually just mean, and I'm going to enjoy every second of it." Her perfectly glossed lips curved upward as she looked me up and down like I was a disappointing clearance rack item. "Hope you're not flying economy again, Leo," she said, loud enough that several nearby passengers turned to look. "You really can't afford to look that broke next to us. I mean, seriously, what would people think?" And then, because apparently the universe decided I hadn't suffered enough, my wife laughed. Not a polite chuckle or an uncomfortable giggle, but a full-on laugh that suggested she found this absolutely hilarious. She looked up from her phone just long enough to pile on. "He's used to it, Clara," Bella said with this dismissive wave of her hand, like she was swatting away a particularly annoying fly. "He likes sitting with the regular people. It's his thing. Very authentic. Oh, fantastic. Regular people. You know, the ones who do crazy things like pay taxes, hold down jobs, and experience human emotions that don't revolve around designer handbags and Instagram likes." The absolute nerve of them, existing in the same general vicinity as the blessed trinity of my in-laws. I stood there clutching my old leather duffel bag. And yeah, it was old. And yeah, it was worn. But it was also genuine leather that had developed character over the years, unlike the personalities of the people currently mocking me. This bag had seen the inside of more hotel rooms than my marriage had seen genuine moments of affection lately, which was saying something. It had traveled with me through 3 continents, survived being thrown by careless baggage handlers, and still had all its zippers intact, which was more than I could say for my patience at this particular moment. But here's the thing I'd learned over the past 2 years of being married into this circus. Arguing with narcissists is like trying to teach a goldfish advanced calculus. It's pointless, exhausting, and at the end of the day, the goldfish still thinks it won because it successfully swam in a circle. So I did what I always did. I smiled. Just a faint little smile, the kind that could mean anything from, "I'm fine with this," to, "I'm planning your demise in excruciating detail." The beauty of ambiguity. I'd learned that silence absolutely terrifies narcissists. They feed on reaction, on drama, on getting a rise out of people. When you don't give them that, when you just stand there with a calm expression like you're contemplating what to have for lunch, they start to panic. It's like watching a computer try to divide by 0. You can almost see the mental blue screen of death happening behind their eyes. Clara and Bella were still giggling, holding up their first-class tickets like they were golden tickets to Willy Wonka's factory. Except instead of chocolate, they were getting access to slightly wider seats and free drinks that they'd brag about for the next 6 months. They waved those tickets around, making sure everyone in the terminal could see them, practically doing a choreographed dance routine about their elevated status. I muttered under my breath, just loud enough for my own amusement, but quiet enough that they couldn't quite hear. "Hope the champagne pairs well with your bad decisions." Maybe they heard me. Maybe they didn't. Honestly, at that point, I was fine either way. I'd reached that zen-like state of not caring that usually takes monks decades of meditation to achieve, but I'd managed to speedrun it through repeated exposure to toxic family dynamics. Call it a gift. They didn't react, too busy adjusting their designer sunglasses indoors like a couple of celebrities who'd mistaken Terminal 3 for the paparazzi gauntlet at LAX. Harold was checking his Rolex for the 17th time in 3 minutes, as if the watch face might magically reveal to him why the universe insisted on making him wait like a common peasant. I just stood there, shifting my weight from one foot to the other, watching the departure board, watching the crowd, watching my in-laws perform their elaborate theater of superiority for an audience that largely consisted of exhausted business travelers who couldn't have cared less. And here's what they didn't know. What they couldn't possibly have known because they were too busy measuring everyone else's worth by their seat assignments and credit card limits. The real show hadn't even started yet. Not even close. They thought this was it. That this moment right here, with them flashing their first-class tickets and me quietly standing with my beat-up duffel bag, was the final scene. The closing credits. But see, that's the thing about underestimating people. It's a dangerous game, especially when you're too blinded by your own perceived superiority to notice what's actually happening around you. They were so convinced of their narrative. Poor Leo, struggling Leo, can't afford first-class Leo, that they'd completely missed the plot. I glanced at my watch. Not a Rolex, just a simple, reliable timepiece that told me exactly what I needed to know. It was almost time. Almost time for the moment when their entire worldview would shift on its axis. Almost time for the schadenfreude I'd been patiently waiting 2 years to experience. The gate agent's voice crackled over the intercom, announcing boarding for their flight. Clara squealed, actually squealed, like a teenager at a boy band concert, and grabbed Bella's arm. Harold straightened his blazer, preparing to grace the aircraft with his presence. And me? I just smiled a little wider, my grip relaxing on the duffel bag. I wasn't worried. I wasn't anxious. I wasn't even particularly annoyed anymore, because I knew something they didn't. And in about 3 minutes, they were going to know it too. If there's one thing I've learned about people who fly first class for the first time in their lives, it's that they will absolutely, without question, make it everyone else's problem. And by people, I specifically mean Bella and Clara, who were currently treating Gate 42 like it was their own personal photo studio, complete with an invisible red carpet that only they could see. I'm talking full-blown fashion shoot here. They'd positioned themselves at the perfect angle where the afternoon sunlight was streaming through the terminal windows, creating that golden hour glow that Instagram influencers would literally commit crimes for. Bella had her phone out on a selfie stick. Yes, a selfie stick. In the year of our Lord 2025, because apparently some trends refused to die with dignity. While Clara struck poses that looked like she was auditioning for America's Next Top Model, Airport Terminal Edition. The pout. Oh God, the pout. You know the one. Lips pushed out like they're trying to kiss an invisible lemon, eyes half closed in what I guess is supposed to be smoldering intensity, but actually looks more like aggressive constipation. Then came the chin angles, with both of them tilting their heads at approximately 45 degrees because someone on TikTok told them it was slimming. They cycled through about 17 different variations of fake laughter. Those performative, oh my gosh, we're having so much fun, giggles that sound like wind chimes being tortured. Click, click, click. The sound of Bella's phone camera was like a machine gun firing rounds of manufactured happiness into the void of social media. Between every shot, they'd huddle together to review the photos, offering critiques like they were curating an exhibition at the Louvre. Delete that one, my arm looks weird. Do another. I'm blinking. Wait, let me fix my hair. Okay, go again. This went on for a solid 15 minutes. Actual human minutes that I will never get back. Watching two grown women try to capture the perfect image to post with the inevitable caption of #FamilyGoals or #blessed or some other hashtag that made me want to throw myself onto the baggage carousel. Meanwhile, other passengers were trying to navigate around them, shooting annoyed glances that Bella and Clara were either completely oblivious to or simply didn't care about. I'm betting on the latter. Self-awareness wasn't exactly their strong suit, which probably explains why they thought this entire performance was normal human behavior. I was standing off to the side, becoming one with a support pillar, just trying to exist in my own quiet space of resigned acceptance. That's when I felt it. The heavy, condescending hand of my father-in-law landing on my shoulder like a sack of wet cement. Harold leaned in close enough that I could smell his expensive cologne mixed with the airport coffee on his breath, which was about as pleasant as you'd imagine. His voice had that particular tone that people use when they think they're being encouraging, but are actually just being patronizing as hell. Leo, he said, giving my shoulder a squeeze that I think was supposed to be supportive, but felt more like a subtle reminder of his dominance in the social hierarchy. Maybe next year you'll join us in first class, eh? You know, if your little projects ever start making real money. Ah yes, my projects. That's what Harold called them, always with this little dismissive chuckle, like I was a 10-year-old with a lemonade stand instead of a grown man running an actual business. The air quotes were invisible, but I could feel them hanging in the space between us like toxic particles. See, in Harold's world, and by extension, in the world of Bella and Clara, real work meant wearing a suit and tie every day, sitting in an office with fluorescent lighting that slowly killed your soul, attending meetings that could have been emails, and generally making yourself miserable in the pursuit of looking important. The fact that I ran a software company, that I worked from home in comfortable clothes, that I actually liked my employees and treated them like human beings instead of replaceable cogs in a corporate machine, that didn't compute. That wasn't real work to him. I could have explained, for probably the 100th time, that my company was actually doing quite well. I could have mentioned the contracts, the clients, the steady growth, the fact that I'd built something from nothing while he'd inherited his position from his daddy's connections. But what would be the point? Harold had already decided who I was in his mind, and no amount of evidence to the contrary was going to change that narrative. So instead, I just nodded politely, keeping my expression neutral, and said, "Sure, Harold. Right after you figure out how to work your email without calling IT support 17 times a day." Clara, who'd paused her photo shoot long enough to catch the tail end of our conversation, let out this shrieking laugh that could probably shatter glass in a 3-mile radius. She thought I was joking, making some kind of self-deprecating humor about the generation gap, or whatever. Her perfectly manicured hand flew to her mouth in that exaggerated gesture of amusement. I wasn't joking. I was dead serious. The man literally had a post-it note on his computer monitor with step-by-step instructions on how to attach a file to an email. But sure, I'm the one who doesn't do real work. Harold just smiled, that smug, satisfied smile of someone who thinks they've won an argument that they didn't even realize was happening. He patted my shoulder one more time before walking away to join his daughters in their ongoing documentation of their superiority. The gate agent's voice came over the intercom, announcing that first-class passengers could now begin boarding. You would have thought they'd just announced that Bella and Clara had won the lottery based on their reaction. They actually squealed, both of them, in harmony, like some kind of demented dolphin chorus. They grabbed their designer carry-ons, adjusted their sunglasses that had somehow migrated back onto their faces despite being indoors, and started prancing toward the first-class boarding lane like gazelles who'd just discovered Pilates. But not before Bella turned back to look at me one more time. And oh boy, here it came. I could see it forming behind her eyes before the words even left her mouth. The final dig, the last little twist of the knife, just to make sure I knew exactly where I stood in the pecking order of her universe. "Don't embarrass yourself trying to upgrade, Leo," she called out, loud enough that several nearby passengers definitely heard. Her tone was sweet, almost sing-songy, which somehow made it worse. "Just stay in your lane, okay? It's better that way. For everyone. Stay in my lane." Like I was a Honda Civic trying to merge onto a highway dominated by Maseratis. Like knowing my place was some kind of virtue that I should embrace. Like the natural order of things demanded that I remain beneath them, looking up in admiration at their purchased superiority. I watched her standing there, first-class ticket held up like a trophy, her sister beside her wearing an expression that said, "Yeah," what she said, and Harold behind them both with his arms crossed like some kind of discount godfather. The three of them, united in their conviction that they were simply better than me by virtue of, what exactly? The ability to pay extra for a wider seat and free champagne? And you know what? In that moment, I could have gotten angry. I could have caused a scene. I could have let them know exactly what I thought about their little hierarchy of worthiness. But that wouldn't have been nearly as satisfying as what I was about to do. So instead, I just smiled. Not a fake smile or a forced smile, but a genuine, calm, knowing smile. The kind of smile that says, "Oh honey, you have no idea what's coming." I looked Bella right in the eyes and said, in a voice that was perfectly measured and completely chill, "Don't worry, babe. My lane has wings." She blinked. Clara tilted her head like a confused puppy. Harold's eyebrows furrowed slightly. They didn't get it. Of course they didn't get it. How could they? They were too busy being impressed with themselves to notice anything beyond their own reflections. Bella just laughed it off, that dismissive little laugh she did whenever I said something she didn't understand or didn't want to acknowledge, and turned back toward the gate. The three of them walked away, boarding passes in hand, ready to enjoy their 3 hours of premium service and mediocre airline food served on actual plates instead of in plastic containers. I stood there, watching them disappear down the jetway, and checked my watch again. Just a few more minutes now. Just a few more minutes until their entire worldview imploded like a poorly constructed sandcastle at high tide. I adjusted the strap on my duffel bag and allowed myself a small chuckle. They thought they knew how this story went. They'd written the script in their heads years ago. Leo the underachiever, Leo the disappointment, Leo who would always be scrambling to keep up with them while they sailed through life in first class, both literally and metaphorically. But here's the thing about scripts. Sometimes the characters go off book. Sometimes the person you cast as the supporting role in your life's drama turns out to be the protagonist of an entirely different story. And sometimes, just sometimes, the person you spent years underestimating has been quietly building an empire while you were busy taking selfies. They'd find out soon enough. Real soon. And I was going to enjoy every single second of it. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out and glanced at the screen. A text message, right on schedule. "Ready when you are, sir." I typed back a quick response, slid the phone back into my pocket, and smiled at the departure board. Showtime. You know that moment in movies when everything suddenly goes quiet? When the background noise just drops away and you can practically hear everyone's heartbeat because something massive is about to happen. Yeah, that was about to be my life in approximately 3 seconds, and I was absolutely ready for it. The gate agent had just called for Bella, Clara, and Harold's boarding group. Row numbers were being announced over the speaker system in that distinct monotone voice that all airport employees seem to develop after their first week on the job. My lovely in-laws were gathering their things. doing one final check of their phones to make sure they hadn't missed any crucial Instagram notifications in the last 90 seconds, preparing for their grand entrance into the first-class cabin where they belonged, where the universe had clearly intended them to be. Clara was in the middle of adjusting her Chanel bag, because of course it was Chanel, and of course the logo was facing outward, and of course she'd positioned it so that maximum people could see it. Bella was touching up her lipstick using her phone camera as a mirror, because apparently the 15 layers she'd already applied weren't quite achieving the desired effect. Harold was straightening his tie, puffing out his chest like a peacock about to display his feathers. And that's when it happened. "Mr. Donovan, your jet's ready, sir. We'll begin pre-flight whenever you're ready." The voice came from directly behind me. Firm, professional, crisp, and most importantly, loud enough to carry across the entire boarding area like a divine proclamation from the heavens. It was the kind of voice that commanded attention, the kind that made people instinctively stop what they were doing and turn to see what was happening. I'm talking dead silence. Like, you could have heard a pin drop on carpet. The entire gate platform, which moments ago had been filled with the ambient noise of rolling luggage, crying babies, people arguing about overhead bin space, and the general chaos of modern air travel, suddenly went absolutely, completely, utterly silent. Time didn't just slow down, it pretty much stopped. I swear I could see individual dust particles floating in the air, suspended in the moment like they were waiting to see what would happen next. Clara froze mid-selfie, her phone still held up at that practiced angle, her mouth literally hanging open in a way that was definitely not Instagram-worthy. Her finger was hovering over the screen, stuck in the motion of tapping, like someone had hit pause on her entire existence. The perfectly curated expression she'd been working on for the past 5 minutes melted away, replaced by pure, unfiltered shock. Bella's head snapped around so fast I'm surprised she didn't give herself whiplash. Her boarding pass, which she'd been clutching like it was the deed to a small country, started trembling in her hand. Just slightly at first, barely noticeable, but enough that I could see it from where I was standing. Her eyes went wide, and I watched in real time as her brain tried to process what she'd just heard, like a computer trying to run software it wasn't equipped for. Harold's face went through about 17 different expressions in the span of 2 seconds. Confusion. Disbelief. More confusion. A hint of panic. Back to disbelief. It was like watching a really intense game of emotional charades. The officer who'd spoken, and let me paint you a picture here, was tall, easily 6'3", dressed in an immaculate dark suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. His shoes were polished to a mirror shine. His posture was military-grade perfect. He was holding a sleek leather folder, the kind that screamed important documents inside. And his expression was completely professional, completely neutral, like announcing that someone's private jet was ready was just another Tuesday for him. Which, to be fair, it probably was. He gestured smoothly toward the private terminal, the movement so practiced and refined it could have been choreographed. "Your car is waiting, sir," he added, his tone carrying just the right amount of deference without being obsequious. This was a man who knew exactly how to treat high-value clients, and he was treating me like I was one of them. Because, well, I was. The silence stretched on. Someone's phone alarm went off in the distance, and the owner frantically scrambled to shut it off, the electronic beeping seeming obscenely loud in the otherwise quiet terminal. A baby started to cry somewhere behind me, but even that seemed muted, like the universe itself was holding its breath. My father-in-law was the first to find his voice, though voice might be generous. It came out as more of a strangled croak, like a frog that had just witnessed something that fundamentally challenged its understanding of reality. "Jet," he managed to squeeze out. As in A. He couldn't even finish the sentence. His brain was clearly trying to reconcile the image he'd built up of me. Struggling Leo, unsuccessful Leo, economy class Leo, with the words he'd just heard. It was like watching someone try to force a square peg into a round hole, except the peg was the size of a shipping container and the hole was the size of a quarter. I took a moment. I really savored it, let it marinate, because opportunities like this don't come along every day. I could feel every single eye in the boarding area on me. Passengers who'd been minding their own business were now openly staring. The gate agents had stopped what they were doing. Even the janitor who'd been emptying trash cans had paused mid-motion. I turned to face Harold fully, maintaining eye contact, and smiled. Not a smirk, not a grin, just a polite, pleasant, perfectly calibrated smile. The kind of smile you'd give to someone who'd just asked you an innocent question about the weather. As in the kind that doesn't have seat 32B, I said, my voice casual, conversational, like we were discussing what I'd had for breakfast. You know, the kind where you don't have to worry about legroom or middle seats, or whether someone's going to recline into your lap. That kind of jet. The murmuring started immediately. People started whispering to each other, leaning in close, shooting glances between me and my in-laws like they were watching a tennis match. I could hear fragments of conversations bubbling up around us. Is that guy famous? Oh my God, did he say private jet? Who is he? Wait, I think I recognize him from somewhere. Phone started coming out. Not even subtly, just straight up pointing at me. I saw at least 3 people open their camera apps, probably preparing to document this moment for their social media feeds. Some teenager off to my left literally mouthed the words, "That's goals," to his friend, his eyes wide with a mixture of admiration and disbelief. Bella tried to speak. I watched her mouth open, close, open again. She looked like a fish that had just been pulled out of water and was trying to figure out how to breathe air. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she managed to form words, though they came out shaky and uncertain. Leo, what is this? Her voice cracked on, what? Which would have been satisfying enough on its own, but the look on her face, that mixture of confusion, shock, and dawning realization that maybe, just maybe, she'd severely miscalculated something, was worth more than every snide comment, every dismissive laugh, every condescending pat on the shoulder I'd endured over the past 2 years. I straightened my jacket, taking my time with it, making sure the collar sat just right. It was a simple gesture, but in that moment, it felt significant. Like I was physically adjusting more than just my clothing. I was adjusting the entire dynamic of our relationship, the power structure that had been assumed for so long. You were right, honey, I said, and I made sure my voice was loud enough for the growing audience to hear. Clear, confident, with just a hint of amusement dancing around the edges. I can't afford economy. It's too cramped for my standards now. You understand. Clara made a noise that sounded like a small animal being stepped on. Harold's face had gone from its normal ruddy color to something approaching the shade of copy paper. Bella just stood there, frozen, her first-class boarding pass hanging limply from her fingers like a surrender flag. I turned to Officer Grant. Yes, the same Grant who used to work in my company's IT department before I promoted him to Director of Executive Security, because I believe in taking care of people who are loyal and competent. What a concept, and gave him a small nod. Let's go, I said, projecting my voice just enough. I hate being late to my own plane. The emphasis on own was subtle, but in the deadly silent terminal, it landed like a bomb. I could practically feel the collective gasp, though it was more of a psychological gasp than an audible one. The energy in the room shifted, crystallized into something electric and charged. Grant nodded once, crisp and professional. Right this way, sir. As I picked up my duffel bag, that same beat-up leather bag that Clara had mocked not 15 minutes ago, which suddenly seemed a lot more vintage chic than pathetic, I took one last look at my in-laws. They were still standing there, the 3 of them clustered together at the gate entrance, first-class boarding passes in hand, surrounded by other first-class passengers who were now looking at them with something between pity and amusement. The tables had turned so completely, so absolutely, that I almost felt bad for them. Almost. Enjoy your flight, I called back over my shoulder, giving them a friendly wave like we were old friends parting ways at a casual brunch instead of witnessing the complete demolition of their superiority complex. I hear the snack boxes in first class are really coming up in the world, almost like real food. And with that, I walked away, following Officer Grant toward the private terminal, leaving behind the stunned silence, the whispers, the phone cameras, and 3 people who were finally beginning to understand that maybe, just maybe, they'd been playing checkers while I'd been playing chess. Walking through the private terminal feels different than walking through a regular airport. And I'm not just talking about the obvious stuff like the marble floors or the fact that there's actual art on the walls instead of advertisements for credit cards and duty-free liquor. It's the atmosphere, the energy of the place. Everything moves slower because nothing needs to rush. There are no gate agents yelling boarding groups, no families sprinting to catch connections, No general sense of barely controlled chaos that defines the commercial aviation experience. It's quiet, peaceful, the kind of environment where you can actually hear yourself think, which is ironic considering I'd spent the last 2 years being told I didn't think enough about real success by people who were currently losing their minds back at Gate 42. The air in here even smelled different: leather, expensive coffee, and what I can only describe as the subtle scent of having your life together. It was the olfactory equivalent of success, if success had hired an interior designer and a really good aromatherapist. Officer Grant walked slightly ahead of me, his stride confident and measured, occasionally nodding to other staff members we passed. A woman in an elegant uniform smiled warmly and asked if I needed anything. An older gentleman behind a mahogany desk looked up from his computer and gave me a respectful nod. This was a world where customer service wasn't performed with gritted teeth and fake smiles. It was genuine, attentive, and somehow made you feel like you weren't being a burden just by existing. We passed through a set of glass doors that probably cost more than most people's cars, and that's when I saw it: the lounge. And okay, calling it a lounge is like calling the Mona Lisa a painting. This place had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the tarmac, plush leather seating that looked like it had been designed by someone who actually understood human anatomy, a full bar staff by an actual bartender who wasn't pouring drinks from plastic bottles, and a spread of food that would make most restaurants jealous. But I wasn't here for the amenities, as nice as they were. I had a schedule to keep and a point to make. Grant turned to me with a professional smile that had just a hint of something else: amusement, maybe, or satisfaction. See, Grant knew the whole story. He'd been there from the beginning, back when I was building skyframe systems from my living room, surviving on coffee and spite, coding until 3 in the morning while Bella complained that my keyboard clicking was keeping her awake. He'd watched me grow the company, watched me succeed despite everyone's predictions of failure, and he'd been loyal through all of it. That's why when I needed someone I could trust to head up executive security, someone who understood discretion and had impeccable timing, Grant was the obvious choice. Plus, he genuinely enjoyed moments like these. I could see it in the slight crinkle around his eyes. "Welcome aboard, sir," he said, his tone formal, but his expression telling me he was enjoying this almost as much as I was. "Jet's fueled and waiting. We can depart whenever you're ready." I nodded, feeling that familiar mix of satisfaction and vindication settling into my bones. "Perfect timing," I said, pulling out my phone. My wife's Instagram followers needed new content anyway, though I don't think this is quite what they were expecting. Grant actually chuckled at that, a low sound that he quickly covered with a professional cough. "Indeed, sir. Shall I escort you to the aircraft?" We walked out onto the tarmac, and there she was, my Gulfstream G650, gleaming white in the afternoon sun, the Skyframe Systems logo subtle but unmistakable on the tail. $65 million of aviation engineering, capable of flying 8,000 nautical miles without refueling, with a top speed of Mach 0.925. She was beautiful, powerful, and most importantly mine. The stairs were already deployed, red carpet running down them, because apparently my flight coordinator had a sense of dramatic flair that I deeply appreciated. The pilots were visible in the cockpit, running through their pre-flight checks. Everything was ready, waiting only for me. But I wasn't in a rush. Not yet. I climbed the stairs slowly, savoring each step, and entered the cabin. The interior was exactly as I'd had it customized: cream-colored leather seats that could fully recline into beds, burled walnut accents, a conference table for when I actually needed to work, a full galley kitchen, and a bathroom that was larger than some New York studio apartments. The lighting was soft and warm, the temperature perfectly calibrated, and my favorite playlist was already queuing up through the sound system. I sank into one of the seats, the leather embracing me like an old friend, and let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. This was it. This was the moment. 2 years of grinding, of building, of being told I wasn't enough, all culminating in this perfect instant of poetic justice. My phone was already out. I pulled up my pilot's number and sent a quick text. "Let's wait 5 minutes before we start taxi. I want them to see it take off." The response came back almost immediately. "Understood, sir. Taking our time. Because here's the thing about revenge. And yeah, I know people say living well is the best revenge, and they're right. But sometimes living well needs an audience." Sometimes the people who spent years making you feel small need to actually witness the moment when they realize just how wrong they were. Not because you need their validation, but because the universe occasionally demands that karma be served with a side of irony, so thick you could cut it with a knife. I settled deeper into my seat and pulled out my laptop. Might as well get some work done while I waited for the show to begin. I had emails to answer, contracts to review, a conference call scheduled with our Tokyo office in an hour. The business didn't stop just because I was having a moment of personal triumph. Through the window, I could see the commercial terminal in the distance. Gate 42 was visible, though the people at it were just small figures from this distance. But I knew they were there. I knew that somewhere in that mass of humanity waiting to board a metal tube with recycled air and minimal legroom, Bella, Clara, and Harold were probably still trying to process what had just happened. Were they boarding yet? Were they in their seats, settling in with their complimentary champagne, trying to convince themselves that this was still a win because at least they weren't in economy? Or were they still standing at the gate, phones out, frantically Googling my name to try to understand how this had happened? I allowed myself a small smile. The beauty of it all was that I didn't actually need to know. The moment had happened. The scales had been balanced. Whatever they were feeling right now, shock, confusion, embarrassment, the slow dawning realization that they'd been complete idiots, that was between them and their own consciences. My phone buzzed. A text from Sophie, my assistant. Just saw the video. Someone posted it on Twitter. You're trending. Hashtag private jet Guyon's in-laws is blowing up. I laughed out loud at that, the sound echoing in the quiet cabin. Of course someone had recorded it. Of course it was already online. This was 2025. If a moment of public humiliation or triumph didn't get posted to social media within 30 seconds, did it even really happen? I typed back. Please tell me someone got Clara's face. Multiple angles. It's chef's kiss perfect. I shook my head, still grinning. The universe really did have a sense of humor sometimes. The captain's voice came through the intercom, smooth and professional. Mr. Donovan, we're ready for pushback whenever you give the word. Weather's perfect, clear skies all the way to Manhattan. Estimated flight time 2 hours and 40 minutes. I glanced at my watch. 5 minutes had passed. Time to make an exit. Let's go, Captain, I said, pressing the intercom button. I've got a conference to get to. Roger that, sir. Beginning pushback now. The engines hummed to life. That low, powerful sound that you feel in your chest more than hear with your ears. The jet began to move, pulling away from the terminal, heading toward the taxiway. I looked out the window one last time toward gate 42, and there they were. Even from this distance, even as small figures against the terminal windows, I could see them. 3 people standing at the window, clearly watching, clearly recognizing the Skyframe Systems logo on the tail of the jet that was now taxiing away. I raised my coffee cup, freshly brewed Ethiopian single origin, served in actual china, not a paper cup in sight, in a silent toast toward the window. To economy, I whispered to myself, my smile widening. May it stay affordable for the rest of them. The jet turned onto the runway, engines powering up for takeoff. Through the window, the terminal began to shrink, becoming smaller and smaller as we accelerated down the tarmac. And then we were up, the nose lifting, the ground falling away, the whole beautiful city of New York spreading out beneath us like a map. I settled back into my seat, pulled up my laptop, and got back to work. Because the thing about winning isn't just the victory itself, it's what you do after. It's proving that the success wasn't a fluke, wasn't luck, wasn't anything except hard work, intelligence, and refusing to let other people's opinions define your potential. Bella and Clara would land in Manhattan in about 3 hours, slightly cramped despite their first-class seats, having paid premium prices for the privilege. I'd be there in 2 hours and 40 minutes, fully rested, having gotten work done in complete comfort and quiet. And the best part? The conference they were flying to attend, the one they'd probably registered for weeks ago, excited to network and be seen at such a prestigious event. Yeah, that was my conference. My company was the primary sponsor. My name was on the building. They just didn't know it yet. But they would. Oh, they absolutely would. I took another sip of my coffee and smiled at the clouds passing by my window. Checkmate. You know what's funny about success? And by funny, I mean the kind of ironic, dark humor that makes you want to laugh and cry at the same time. It's that the people who doubt you the most are usually the ones standing closest to you. Not strangers, not distant acquaintances, but the people who are supposed to have your back, who are supposed to believe in you even when things look impossible. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me rewind the tape a bit. Take you back to where this whole thing started. Back when Bella and I were still Team Donovan. Before the team imploded and became more like Bella and her disappointment of a husband. It was 2 years ago, almost to the day. I was working at TechCorp Solutions, pulling in a solid 6-figure salary, doing cybersecurity consulting for corporate clients. It was stable, predictable, safe. The kind of job that made in-laws smile and nod approvingly at Thanksgiving dinner. I wore business casual, had a parking spot with my name on it, got decent benefits and 3 weeks of vacation that I never actually took, because corporate culture is basically a cult that shames you for having a life outside the office. But here's the thing, I was absolutely miserable. Like, wake up every morning and question your life choices level of miserable. The work itself was fine, even interesting sometimes, but the environment was soul-crushing. Politics, bureaucracy, meetings about meetings, entire days wasted on conference calls where nothing got decided. I was watching my life tick away in 15-minute increments on an Outlook calendar, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was meant for something more than optimizing firewall configurations for companies that saw their IT department as a necessary evil rather than an asset. So I made a decision. I was going to leave. I was going to take everything I'd learned about corporate aviation systems, because TechCorp's biggest client was an airline consortium, and I'd spent 3 years deep in their infrastructure, and I was going to build something of my own. Skyframe Systems, a logistics platform specifically designed for private and corporate aviation, something that could revolutionize how the industry handled everything from flight planning to maintenance scheduling to real-time aircraft tracking. I had the technical knowledge. I had the industry connections. I had a vision for something that didn't exist yet, but absolutely should. And I had exactly $73,000 in savings that I was willing to bet on myself. When I told Bella, her initial reaction was actually supportive. I remember it clearly. We were sitting on our couch, the same couch where we'd planned our wedding, talked about our future, dreamed about what our life could be. I laid out the whole plan for her, showing her my business model, my projections, the market research I'd done. Her eyes lit up. She squeezed my hand, and she said, "Let's do this. I believe in you." That support lasted approximately 72 hours. By day 4, reality had apparently set in. Or maybe Clara had gotten to her. Or Harold. Or both. Probably both. The questions started coming, each one laced with just a little more doubt, a little more concern, a little more subtle implication that maybe I was making a huge mistake. But why risk stability? Bella asked over breakfast one morning, stirring her coffee with more aggression than the situation warranted. "We have a good life. Why would you throw that away?" I tried to explain that I wasn't throwing anything away. I was building something. That sometimes you have to take calculated risks if you want to achieve anything beyond comfortable mediocrity. That playing it safe your entire life is actually the riskiest choice you can make because you're guaranteed to end up with regrets. She wasn't convinced. And over the following weeks, as I put in my notice at TechCorp and started setting up Skyframe, the criticism intensified. "You're not like Clara's husband," she said one evening, scrolling through Instagram, showing me pictures of Brandon, Clara's husband, standing next to his new Tesla Model S, looking smug as hell in the driver's seat. He owns a Tesla. He has a real career at a real company. He's stable. Right. Brandon, the guy who worked in middle management at his father-in-law's commercial real estate firm, who'd had every opportunity handed to him on a silver platter, who thought cryptocurrency was a skincare product and had once asked me if the cloud was an actual cloud where they kept all the data. That was the standard I was being compared to. A guy who couldn't figure out how to unmute himself on Zoom calls and had to be walked through the process every single time. But sure, he had a Tesla, so obviously he was winning at life. The comparisons didn't stop there. Every family gathering became an opportunity for me to be reminded of my inadequacies. Clara's husband had bought a boat. When was I going to buy a boat? Bella's cousin had just gotten promoted to VP of something meaningless at a company that would probably be bankrupt in 5 years. Why wasn't I pursuing corporate advancement? Harold's friend's son had just bought a house in the Hamptons. What was wrong with our perfectly nice apartment in Brooklyn? It was exhausting, like being slowly suffocated by other people's definitions of success, none of which had anything to do with actual fulfillment or achievement, and everything to do with visible status symbols and impressive-sounding job titles. Still, I stayed calm. I kept my head down and worked. I worked nights after Bella went to bed, coding until 2 or 3 in the morning, surviving on coffee and the stubborn belief that I was on as something real. I worked weekends while she went on shopping trips with Clara, retail therapy sessions that seemed to happen with increasing frequency, funded by credit cards that I was still helping to pay off. I pitched my platform to potential clients, getting rejected over and over again before finally landing my first contract, a small charter company out of Newark that was willing to take a chance on my system. Then another client. Then another. Slowly, painfully, the business started to grow. But during all this time, while I was building something from nothing, proving that my vision had merit, the people who were supposed to be my family, my wife, my in-laws, even some of my friends, they all kept telling me I was going to fail. "This is too risky," Bella would say, barely looking up from her phone. "You should have stayed at TechCorp," Harold would remind me at every opportunity. "I don't understand why you're doing this to yourself," Clara would add, her tone dripping with pity that felt more like contempt. Everyone had an opinion. Everyone had advice. And none of it was helpful or supportive or even remotely based on an understanding of what I was actually trying to accomplish. The worst part wasn't even the criticism. It was the casual dismissal. The way Bella would introduce me at parties. "This is my husband, Leo. He's doing a tech thing." It's complicated. The way she'd laugh along when Clara made jokes about my little startup. The way Harold would pat me on the shoulder and say things like, "Well, if this doesn't work out, you can always go back to a real job." A real job. As if what I was doing, building a company from scratch, creating actual value, employing people, solving real problems, wasn't real work because it didn't come with a business card from an established corporation. I remember one particularly brutal family dinner about a year into building Skyframe. We were at some overpriced restaurant in Manhattan that Harold had chosen because it was exclusive and had a wait list. Clara and Brandon were there, talking about their upcoming vacation to the Maldives. Bella was showing everyone pictures of a designer handbag she wanted to buy, price tag, for $1,000. Harold was going on about his new Rolex. And then Clara turned to me, wine glass in hand, and said, "So Leo, how's the startup going? Made your first million yet?" She laughed, and everyone joined in. It was a joke, you see. The idea that I could be successful was hilarious to them. I smiled politely and said, "Getting there. Just signed a major contract with Atlas Aviation Group." Silence. They didn't know what to say to that because they didn't actually know anything about my industry or what that contract meant. So they just nodded and changed the subject, moving on to more important topics like the thread count of the sheets at their upcoming resort. That was the moment I realized something crucial. They didn't want me to succeed. Oh, they'd never admit it, probably didn't even consciously acknowledge it themselves. But on some level, my success would be inconvenient for them. It would disrupt the narrative they'd built, the comfortable story where they were the successful ones and I was the well-meaning failure, the cautionary tale they could point to when talking about the dangers of taking risks. My success would force them to confront their own choices, their own fears, their own safe little lives built on inherited wealth and conventional paths. And that was threatening. So I stopped talking about the business at family gatherings. I stopped trying to explain what I was building or sharing my wins. I just smiled, nodded, and let them think whatever they wanted to think. Meanwhile, I kept working. 12-hour days turned into 14-hour days. I brought on Grant to handle IT security, then Sophie as my executive assistant. I landed contracts with 3 major corporate aviation companies. I developed partnerships with airports across the country. Revenue started climbing, not just surviving numbers, but thriving numbers, the kind that made accountants get excited. And through it all, Bella became more distant. She stopped asking about the business. She stopped pretending to be interested in my work. Our conversations became transactional, bills to pay, schedules to coordinate, the mechanical maintenance of a marriage that had stopped being a partnership somewhere along the way. The irony, the absolute comedy of it all. While they were busy shopping and brunching and posting filtered photos of their blessed lives, while they were flying first class on their twice-a-year vacations and considering it the height of luxury, I was quietly building an empire. The same family trip they were currently flying to, the Global Logistics Tech Summit in Manhattan, was being sponsored by my company. My company. Skyframe Systems was the primary sponsor. My name was on every piece of promotional material. My face was on the website as the keynote speaker. They'd registered for it weeks ago, probably saw the sponsor logos and didn't even make the connection because they'd never bothered to learn what my company was actually called or what it actually did. They were flying to a conference that I was hosting to celebrate an industry that I was revolutionizing in a city where I was about to be recognized as one of the fastest-growing tech entrepreneurs on the East Coast. And they had no idea. The schadenfreude was going to be absolutely delicious. Landing in Manhattan never gets old, especially when you're doing it in your own jet at Teterboro Airport instead of fighting for overhead bin space at LaGuardia. The descent was smooth as silk, the kind of landing where you barely feel the wheels touch down, and within minutes we were taxiing to the private terminal where my car was already waiting. No baggage claim. No waiting in line for a taxi while some guy tries to cut in front of you. No surge pricing on an Uber because apparently algorithms have decided that your desperate need to get somewhere is an excellent opportunity for price gouging. Just a smooth, seamless transition from air to ground, the way travel should be, but almost never is for normal people. I descended the jet stairs. Yes, they rolled out an actual red carpet again, because my flight coordinator clearly understood the assignment, and there she was. Sophie Martinez, my executive assistant, standing next to a black Mercedes S-Class, looking impeccable as always in a charcoal gray suit, tablet in hand, ready to brief me on whatever chaos needed managing. Sophie was 32, whip-smart, efficient to the point of being almost psychic about what I needed before I knew I needed it, and had a sense of humor dry enough to make the Sahara look like a rainforest. She'd been with me since year one of Skyframe, back when executive assistant meant person who does literally everything, because we can't afford to hire anyone else. Now she had her own assistant, but she still preferred to handle the important stuff personally. She grinned as I approached, that knowing smile that told me she was fully aware of what had gone down at JFK and was absolutely living for the drama. Big night, boss, she said, falling into step beside me as we headed toward the car. You're opening the Global Logistics Tech Summit at 7. Cocktail reception starts at 6. Press wants photos at 5:30. And guess who RSVP'd to the event? She paused for dramatic effect, eyebrows raised. Bella, Clara, and Harold. I couldn't help it. I laughed. Actually laughed, the sound echoing across the tarmac. Of course they did. Never miss an opportunity for free champagne and networking with people they think are important. Oh, it gets better, Sophie continued, consulting her tablet as we slid into the back seat of the Mercedes. They registered 3 weeks ago. Used Bella's maiden name on the registration, probably why it didn't flag in our system. And according to their social media, which I may or may not have been monitoring, they've been posting about this exclusive industry event they're attending. Very excited. Many hashtags. The car pulled smoothly into Manhattan traffic, which on a Friday evening was its usual nightmare of gridlock and aggressive horn honking, but somehow felt less stressful when you were sitting in leather seats with a driver who actually knew what he was doing. I looked out the window at the city sliding by, yellow cabs, food trucks, tourists taking selfies, professionals in suits rushing somewhere important, the organized chaos that made New York, New York. And rising above it all, literally and figuratively, were the billboards. My billboards. We passed one on the FDR Drive. Massive, probably 40 feet tall, impossible to miss. The Skyframe Systems logo glowed against a deep blue background that faded into an image of a jet cutting through clouds. Below it, in clean, modern typography, Skyframe Systems, the future of flight. Then another one on Lexington Avenue, as we cut through Midtown. This one featured a sleek visualization of our platform's interface, all clean lines and intuitive design, with the tagline, transforming aviation one flight at a time. And another on Times Square, right in the heart of the tourist madness, our logo displayed alongside the conference information, Global Logistics Tech Summit, sponsored by Skyframe Systems. Sophie noticed me looking and smiled. The marketing team went all out. We've got placements in 4 airports, 6 major highways, and every major transit hub in the tri-state area. If you're traveling anywhere in the Northeast this week, you're seeing our name. A funny thought hit me. One of those moments of perfect irony that made me appreciate just how completely the tables had turned. 2 years ago, just 24 months, Bella had mocked me for designing fancy airplane software. Those were her exact words, said with that particular tone of dismissive amusement, like I was a kid playing with Lincoln Logs instead of an adult building an actual business. "It's just fancy airplane software, Leo," she'd said, scrolling through her phone while I tried to explain the market opportunity. "How many people actually need that?" I tried to explain that the private and corporate aviation industry was worth billions, that it was growing exponentially, that the existing systems were outdated and inefficient, that I'd identified a genuine gap in the market. She'd just shrugged and gone back to Instagram. Now that fancy airplane software was running the navigation and logistics systems for half the corporate jets in North America. It was processing thousands of flight plans daily. It was saving companies millions in operational costs. And yeah, it was making me wealthy enough to own my own jet. Karma, I thought, staring at another billboard as we passed, really does have a first-class seat. Actually, forget first class. Karma had its own private jet, and it was landing right on top of people who deserved it. "You seem contemplative," Sophie observed, tapping something on her tablet. "Nervous about the keynote?" "Not even a little bit," I said, which was true. Public speaking had never bothered me, probably because I genuinely cared about what I was talking about. It's easy to be confident when you're not selling snake oil or trying to convince people that your mediocre product is revolutionary. I'd built something real, something valuable, and I was just going to tell people about it. "Good," she said, "because the press is very interested in you. Forbes wants an interview. TechCrunch is doing a feature. And apparently Bloomberg is calling you the dark horse of aviation tech because you came out of nowhere." I hadn't come out of nowhere. I'd come out of 2 years of grinding work that people had dismissed as a vanity project. But I understood what they meant. I'd kept a relatively low profile, focusing on building the business rather than building my personal brand. While other tech CEOs were posting motivational quotes on LinkedIn and doing podcast tours, I'd been actually working. The car pulled up to the Peninsula Hotel, where I'd be staying for the weekend. Not because I needed the luxury, though the rooms were admittedly spectacular, but because it was hosting the conference and it made logistical sense. Plus, the view of Fifth Avenue from the suites was pretty incredible. "You've got about 90 minutes before you need to be at the venue," Sophie said as the driver opened my door. "Hair and makeup will meet you in your suite in 45. Your tux is already pressed and hanging in the closet. Speech is loaded on the teleprompter, but you've got the notes on your phone if you want to review. You're terrifyingly efficient, you know that?" I said, grabbing my bag. "That's why you pay me the big bucks," she shot back. Also, I took the liberty of having a bottle of Macallan 25 sent to your room. Figured you might want to toast the moment before you go out there and blow their minds. I grinned. "This is why you're the best." "I know. See you at the venue." "And Leo?" She paused, her expression shifting from professional to genuinely pleased. "Enjoy this. You earned it." The suite was exactly what you'd expect from a hotel that regularly hosted heads of state and celebrities trying to avoid paparazzi. Spacious, elegantly appointed, with that particular kind of understated luxury that whispers rather than shouts. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Manhattan at dusk, the city starting to light up as the sun set behind the buildings. I poured myself a finger of the Macallan, neat, and stood at the window, watching the city pulse with energy below. Somewhere out there, probably at LaGuardia or JFK, Bella, Clara, and Harold were landing. They'd collect their luggage from baggage claim, fight for a taxi, or deal with an overpriced Uber, sit in traffic for an hour to get to whatever hotel they'd booked. Probably something nice, but not quite peninsula-level nice. They'd check in, freshen up, probably take some photos in their hotel room to post on Instagram. Hashtag NYCLife, hashtag business travel, hashtag living my best life. Then they'd head to the conference venue, excited to network, to be seen, to post photos of themselves at this exclusive industry event. And they'd have no idea that the name they kept seeing everywhere, on the banners, on the promotional materials, on the badges, on those billboards they'd passed on their way in, was mine. My phone buzzed. A text from Grant. "Perimeter secured at venue. Press is setting up. Security briefing complete. Ready when you are, sir." Another text from Sophie. "Hair and makeup in the lobby. Sending them up now. Also, The conference organizers want to know if you prefer sparkling or still water at the podium. I typed back, still. Thanks. Then I opened my photos and scrolled back to one from 2 years ago. Me in my tiny home office, surrounded by whiteboards covered in diagrams and code, looking exhausted but determined. I'd asked Bella to take it because I wanted to document the beginning, wanted to remember what it felt like to start from zero. She'd taken the photo reluctantly, made a comment about how I looked obsessed and crazy, then went back to watching reality TV in the living room. I looked at that photo now, at the exhausted face of a guy who was betting everything on an idea that most people thought was doomed to fail, and I silently saluted him. We did it, man, I whispered to the younger version of myself. We actually did it. There was a knock at the door, hair and makeup, right on schedule. I downed the rest of my whiskey, feeling the warmth spread through my chest, and smiled at my reflection in the window. Tonight was going to be one for the books, and Bella, Clara, and Harold had front row seats to their own humiliation. Showtime. The Javits Center at night is something else. All glass and steel and lights, looking like someone built a spaceship in the middle of Manhattan and just decided to host events in it. The Global Logistics Tech Summit had taken over the entire North Pavilion, and as my car pulled up to the entrance, I could see the banners hanging from the ceiling. Massive things, probably 30 feet long, with the Skyframe Systems logo prominently displayed alongside the conference branding. The red carpet, because apparently tech conferences had adopted Hollywood's playbook, stretched from the curb to the entrance, lined with photographers, videographers, and journalists with recording devices. Overhead lights created that artificial daylight glow that makes everything look more dramatic than it actually is. It was the kind of setup that screamed, "Important people are here," which I guess was accurate, even if it felt a little over the top. Grant was waiting by the door, earpiece in, looking every bit the professional security director. He gave me a subtle nod as I stepped out of the car, which I'd learned was his way of saying, "Everything's good, no threats, you're clear to proceed." 2 years of working together had developed its own shorthand. But before I could even take 3 steps toward the entrance, they descended. The press, like a flock of very well-dressed vultures who'd spotted fresh meat. Cameras started flashing, creating this strobe effect that would have been disorienting if I hadn't been expecting it. Microphones appeared out of nowhere, thrust toward my face by reporters who'd clearly had their coffee and were ready for sound bites. "Mr. Donovan. Mr. Donovan." A woman from what looked like a major tech publication pushed to the front. "Is it true your company just acquired Sky Global Airways? Can you confirm the rumors?" That. The acquisition had been in the works for 3 months, confidential until about 48 hours ago, when some analyst with too much time and too many industry connections had figured it out and leaked it to the trades. Sky Global was a regional carrier, nothing huge, but it represented vertical integration, owning not just the software, but the actual aviation operation. It was a chess move that had made my competitors very nervous and my investors very happy. I stopped, smiled at the reporter, and said, "Let's just say I like owning the places I was once told I couldn't afford." The reporters ate that up. I could practically see them mentally drafting their headlines. Tech entrepreneurs' revenge acquisition, or some variation thereof. More questions came flying at me. What's next for Skyframe? Are the IPO rumors true? How does it feel to be called the youngest self-made CEO in aviation tech? I answered a few more, keeping it professional but personable, giving them enough content to work with, but not so much that I'd have nothing left to say during the actual keynote. This was the dance of modern business. You had to feed the media machine without letting it consume you entirely. Sophie appeared at my elbow, perfectly timed as always. "Mr. Donovan, they're ready for you inside." I gave the press a final wave and headed through the doors into the venue proper. The cocktail reception was already in full swing. Probably 300 people in business formal attire, holding champagne flutes and small plates of appetizers that looked too pretty to eat. Networking with that particular intensity that comes from knowing everyone in the room might be useful to you someday. The space was stunning. Whoever had designed it understood drama. The ceiling was draped in fabric that changed colors slowly. Deep blues fading into purples, then into golds. Our logo was projected onto multiple surfaces, impossible to miss. Sleek white furniture created conversation areas. Bars at each corner ensured nobody's glass stayed empty for long. And the people. CEOs of major aviation companies, CTOs from Fortune 500s, venture capitalists, industry analysts, journalists from every major publication, government officials from the FAA. This wasn't just a tech conference. This was the who's who of aviation, logistics, and technology, all gathered in one place. And I'd built the thing they all came to talk about. I worked the room for about 20 minutes, shaking hands, making small talk, having conversations that would probably lead to contracts or partnerships down the line. Everyone wanted a moment, wanted to tell me about their company, wanted to explore potential synergies. It was exhausting and exhilarating in equal measure. That's when I saw them. Bella, Clara, and Harold, standing near one of the bars, looking simultaneously impressed and overwhelmed. They were dressed up. Clara in some designer dress that probably cost more than a used car, Bella in a cocktail dress I recognized from her Instagram posts, Harold in a suit that was nice, but somehow still made him look like he was trying too hard. They had their conference badges around their necks, marking them as general attendees rather than VIPs or press. They were scanning the room, clearly trying to spot someone important to network with, completely oblivious to the fact that the most important person in the building was standing 30 feet away, watching them with a mixture of amusement and satisfaction. Bella said something to Clara, who laughed and pulled out her phone, probably to take pictures for social media. Harold was already working on his second drink, which tracked with his usual behavior at open bar events. I could have approached them then, could have walked up and watched their faces shift from confusion to recognition to horror. But that would have been too easy, too quick. I wanted them to figure it out slowly, wanted the realization to dawn on them in the most public, most undeniable way possible. Sophie touched my arm. 5 minutes to showtime. They want you backstage. I nodded, taking one last look at my in-laws, blissfully unaware of what was about to happen, and followed Sophie toward the main ballroom. The ballroom was massive, easily seating for 1,000 people, all facing a stage that looked like it belonged at TED Talks. Massive screens flanked both sides, currently displaying the conference logo and the evening's agenda. The lighting was professional grade. The sound system was probably worth more than my first apartment, and the energy in the room was electric. People were still filing in, finding their seats, checking their phones one last time before the program started. I caught glimpses of familiar faces, clients, partners, competitors who'd probably come to see what all the fuss was about. I was backstage now, in the wings where the speakers waited before their moment in the spotlight. A production assistant with a headset was doing checks, making sure everyone knew their cue times. The conference organizer, a woman named Patricia who'd been emailing me for 6 months about this event, appeared with a huge smile. "Mr. Donovan, so thrilled you could make it. Are you ready? Do you need anything? Water? The teleprompter is set, but I have your slides pulled up just in case you want to." "Patricia," I interrupted gently. "I'm good. Let's do this." She beamed, clearly relieved that I wasn't one of those high-maintenance speakers who needed their MNMS sorted by color or whatever. "Fantastic. You're on in 2 minutes. You'll hear the introduction, then you walk out stage right. The spotlight will find you. Take your time, on the moment." I could hear the crowd settling in the ballroom, the ambient chatter dropping as people realized the program was about to start. Through a gap in the curtain, I could see the front rows, and there they were. Bella, Clara, and Harold, seated about 10 rows back, slightly off to the left. They'd scored decent seats, probably arrived early to make sure they could see everything. Oh, they were going to see everything all right. The lights in the ballroom dimmed. A hush fell over the crowd, that particular kind of anticipatory silence that happens right before something big. A single spotlight illuminated the podium at center stage. The announcer's voice, deep, authoritative, the kind of voice that demanded attention, boomed through the sound system. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the opening ceremony of the Global Logistics Tech Summit. Tonight, we have the privilege of hearing from a true innovator, a visionary who has transformed the aviation technology landscape in just 2 short years. His company, Skyframe Systems, has revolutionized how we think about flight operations, logistics, and the future of aviation. Please join me in welcoming our keynote speaker, the founder and CEO of Skyframe Systems, Mr. Leo Donovan." The applause started immediately, building like a wave. The spotlight swung from the podium to stage right, finding me in the wings. This was it. I stepped out onto that stage, and the applause got louder. I could see faces in the crowd, some I recognized, many I didn't, all of them looking up at me with interest, attention, respect. And I could see Bella's wine glass slip from her fingers. Even from the stage, even with the spotlight in my eyes, I could see it happen in slow motion. The glass tumbled, spilling red wine down the front of her dress before shattering on the floor. Her face went absolutely white, like all the blood had just drained out of her body and pooled somewhere around her designer heels. Clara's jaw literally dropped. Not metaphorically. I mean, her mouth actually fell open in that cartoon character way that you don't think happens in real life until you witness it firsthand. Her phone slipped from her hand and clattered onto her lap. And Harold. Oh, Harold. The man looked like someone had just told him that his entire investment portfolio had been revealed as a Ponzi scheme. His face cycled through about 6 different shades of red before settling on a kind of grayish purple that probably meant his blood pressure had just spiked to dangerous levels. I reached the podium, adjusted the microphone with practiced ease, and let the applause die down naturally. The screens on either side of the stage came to life, displaying my photo alongside the Skyframe Systems logo and the company's key achievements over the past 2 years. The ballroom was silent now, 1,000 people waiting to hear what I had to say. I smiled, genuine, confident, maybe with just a hint of the satisfaction I was feeling, and began. 2 years ago, I said, my voice carrying easily through the excellent sound system, I was told I wasn't good enough to sit in first class. Pause. Let that land. So I built my own airline instead. The laughter started, surprised, delighted, the kind of laughter that comes from people who appreciate a good underdog story. The applause built again, this time with energy, with enthusiasm. I could see Bella frantically trying to dab at the wine stain on her dress with a napkin. Clara was frozen, staring at me like I was a ghost who'd just materialized at her dinner table. Harold had his phone out, probably Googling my name right then and there, trying to figure out how he'd missed this. And I was just getting started. The keynote went exactly as planned. 20 minutes of vision, innovation, and carefully crafted sound bites that would make excellent quotes for the tech blogs covering the event. I talked about the future of aviation, about democratizing technology, about building something meaningful instead of just chasing profit margins. The audience ate it up, giving me a standing ovation that lasted long enough to feel genuinely gratifying rather than just polite. But the real show started after I stepped off that stage. The reception area had transformed into a networking frenzy, everyone wanting to shake my hand, exchange business cards, pitch me their ideas, or just be seen talking to me. It's funny how success makes you instantly more interesting to people who wouldn't have given you the time of day 2 years ago. I worked through the crowd with practiced efficiency, Sophie running interference when needed, until I saw Bella approaching. She moved cautiously, like she was approaching a wild animal that might bolt or attack. The wine stain on her dress had been mostly cleaned up, but you could still see the faint outline if you knew to look for it. Her expression was carefully neutral, probably practiced in the bathroom mirror before she built up the courage to come find me. Leo, she said, her voice smaller than I'd ever heard it. Why didn't you tell me? I smiled, keeping my tone pleasant, conversational, like we were discussing weekend plans instead of the complete demolition of her worldview. Because you would have told Clara. It was a simple statement of fact, and we both knew it was true. Bella couldn't keep a secret from her sister if her life depended on it. Everything was content for their group chat, fodder for their endless phone calls, material for their matching Instagram stories. Clara materialized beside her sister, apparently having decided that safety in numbers was the way to go. She was trying to maintain that superior smirk, but it kept faltering, like a mask that didn't quite fit anymore. You just got lucky, she said, but there was no conviction behind it. It sounded like something she felt obligated to say rather than something she actually believed. I took a sip of my champagne, the good stuff, not the cheap Prosecco they were serving at the general bars, and looked at her directly. Sure, Clara. Luck looks great with 120-hour work weeks, 3 years of 14-hour days, and building something from absolutely nothing. Super lucky. She didn't have a response to that. What could she say? That inheriting your lifestyle from your parents' money and marrying someone with a trust fund took just as much work? We both knew the truth. Harold appeared then, completing the dysfunctional family reunion. He looked older somehow, like the past hour had aged him. His usual bluster was gone, replaced by something that almost looked like humility, though I suspected it was actually just shock that hadn't fully processed yet. "Leo," he said, and actually had the decency to sound somewhat ashamed. "We underestimated you." Finally, someone was stating the obvious. I could have been gracious about it, could have accepted the half apology with humility and moved on like the bigger person. But you know what? I'd spent 2 years being the bigger person while they made me feel like I was 2 feet tall. "No," I corrected, my voice calm but firm. "You just overestimated yourselves." The words hung in the air between us, sharp and undeniable. This wasn't anger speaking. It was simple truth, delivered without malice, but without sugarcoating either. They'd built their entire sense of superiority on foundations that were never as solid as they thought, and now those foundations were crumbling in real time. It wasn't revenge that drove my words, not really. It was amusement. The pure, uncomplicated amusement of watching people who'd spent years mocking my ambition now desperately wanting to be part of my success story. The same people who'd laughed at my projects now wanted photos with me for their LinkedIn profiles, wanted to tell their friends they knew me back when, wanted to retroactively claim they'd always believed in me. A photographer from Forbes approached, asking if I'd pose for a quick shot. Harold immediately straightened his tie, Clara fixed her hair, and Bella moved closer to me. All three of them preparing to jump into the frame like this was a normal family photo opportunity. The photographer looked at me questioningly, and I gave him the slightest shake of my head. "Just me," I said pleasantly. "Thanks, though." I walked away to take the photo, leaving the three of them standing there in their awkward cluster, finally understanding what it felt like to not be included, to be dismissed, to watch someone else's success from the outside looking in. And it felt absolutely perfect. Later that night, as the crowd thinned and guests mingled over their third or fourth drinks, Bella found me one last time. The desperation in her eyes was almost painful to watch, like she was realizing in real time just how badly she'd miscalculated everything. "I was wrong," she said, her voice cracking slightly. "You were always destined for more. I see that now." I looked at her, really looked at her, and felt nothing. No anger, no vindication, just a calm, settled emptiness where our relationship used to be. "I know," I said simply. "I just didn't realize you weren't coming along for the flight." She blinked, processing. "You're still bitter?" "No, Bella. I'm upgraded." The word hung between us, carrying more weight than she probably understood. I wasn't talking about seat assignments anymore. I was talking about my entire life, my perspective, my standards. I'd upgraded everything, and she was still stuck on the tarmac wondering what happened. Clara whispered something to Harold nearby, her voice carrying just enough for me to hear. "Is he serious?" Harold muttered back, looking defeated, deadly. Sophie approached with perfect timing. "Your jet's ready for departure, sir." This time, nobody laughed. Back aboard the jet, the cabin lights dimmed to a comfortable glow. Grant saluted as I settled into my seat. "Back to LA, sir?" I looked out at the Manhattan skyline, the city lights twinkling like a million tiny stars scattered across the darkness. "Back to peace." As the engines powered up and we lifted off, climbing smoothly through the night sky, I thought about that morning at Terminal 3. The laughter, the mockery, the casual cruelty of people who'd convinced themselves they were better than me. And then the moment, that beautiful, perfect moment, when they realized they'd been wrong the entire time. I sipped my espresso, watching the city shrink beneath us, and smiled at my own reflection in the window. "Some people measure success by ticket class," I said quietly to myself. "I measure it by altitude." Outside, the jet soared through the clouds, smooth, quiet, untouchable. We climbed higher and higher until even the lights of New York disappeared below us, leaving only stars above and darkness below. And that was the funny part, the cosmic joke that made everything worth it. They'd wanted first class. I'd built my own sky.